I'd like to call this meeting of Orangeville Town Council to order, Monday, February 1st, 2021. Due to efforts to contain the spread of COVID-19 and to protect all individuals, the council chambers of Town Hall will not be open to the public to attend council meetings until further notice. Members of the public who have an interest in a matter listed on the agenda may, up until 10 a.m. on the day of the scheduled council meeting, email councilagenda@orangeville.ca indicating your request to speak to a matter listed on the agenda. A phone number and conference ID code will be provided to you so that you may join the virtual meeting and provide your comments to council. Members of the public wishing to raise a question during the public question period of the council meeting may, beginning at 8:30 p.m. on the evening of the council meeting, call 1-289-801-5774 and enter conference ID 890-423-267 #. Correspondence and emails submitted will be considered as public information and entered into the public record. If you require access to information in an alternate format, please contact the Clerk's Division by phone at 519-941-0440 extension 2256 or email at clerksdepartment@orangeville.ca. May I have a motion to approve this agenda? Councillor Peters, second by Councillor Sherwood. All in favor?
Yes.
And by the way, this recommendation is that the agenda and the addendums for the February 1st, 2021 council meeting be approved. Okay, any disclosures of indirect or direct pecuniary interest? Seeing none, we will now move to the singing of our national anthem.
Oh, Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love in all of us command. With glowing hearts we see thee rise, the true north strong and free. From far and wide, oh Canada, we stand on guard for thee. God keep our land glorious and free. Oh Canada, we stand on guard for thee. Oh Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
Thank you to David Nairn, Artistic Director of Theatre Orangeville, for that rendition of our national anthem. We would like to acknowledge the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe people, including the Ojibwe, Potawatomi, and Odawa of the Three Fires Confederacy. This meeting is being aired on public television and are streamed live and may be taped for later public broadcast or webcast. Your name is part of the public record and will be included in the minutes of this meeting. All right, we're going to move right into the presentation of our 2021 capital budget. And to kick it off, we have Ms. Nandini Syed, our treasurer.
Thank you, Worship. Worship, give me a moment to upload the presentation. Your Worship, can you confirm if you can see my slides?
Yes, we can.
All right, thank you, Worship. Through your Worship to Council, welcome to 2021 budget presentation. Our focus tonight is capital budget. Tonight's presentation is organized into 4 different sections, each section covered by different presenters, including myself and our 3 TMs. Your Worship, I will open tonight's agenda with an overview of our capital investment envelope, followed by an overview of different funding sources. I will then proceed to set the stage for departmental capital budget presentations by Ms. McKinney, Mr. Osmond, and Mr. Jones. As we move toward a more performance-based budget model, we have aligned and segregated 2021 capital investment into three broader buckets. So the 47.6 million gross capital investment that you're looking at is divided into three broader buckets. So the pie chart that you have in front of you, I would like to draw your attention to the blue and the orange section of the pie that represent projects that are carried forward from 2020 and prior years. These projects are council approved from previous years. Most of these projects are multi-year by design. Some of them are carried forward due to unavoidable delays or circumstances, for example, the ongoing pandemic. Now, you may ask, what is the benefit of dividing this into three different buckets, and what's the benefit of showing in a budget document any prior year carry forward? Well, the benefit of presenting it this way is twofold. First, it provides council a clear picture of funds that are committed to multi-year project. I believe last year when we were going through budget deliberation, a question that came before me was in regard to this. How do we know, Nandini, when we're looking at multi-year projects, how much has been already committed to this from previous years? Well, this will allow you to have a clearer picture. Second, it provides a realistic picture of in-year work plan and workload for our capital initiatives. So the next slide shows capital investment by different division. Now, there isn't really much to explain here other than the fact that this graph includes both tax-funded as well as self-funded divisions. We now move on to our funding sources overview. So on this slide, what you can see is that majority of our capital initiatives are funded through reserves and reserve funds. So the green portion of the pie chart illustrates that 35% of the funding source comes from reserves. It is worthwhile to mention that this also includes any committed funds for carry forward projects. 8% comes from development charges, 2% from federal gas tax. Financing covers about 26%, 3% from provincial and other federal grants. Wastewater rates cover 4% and water rates cover 17%. That brings us to taxation, which accounts for 5% of the overall funding. Now, council will note that the tax implication for 2021 capital investment is at 2.6 million. This has been the same level that we've been maintaining since 2019 as per council direction. Therefore, there is no increase per se to our levy requirement between last year and this year. So before I hand over the presentation to the other presenters tonight, Council, what I would like to reiterate is that as we move toward a more performance-based model, budget numbers are further augmented by key performance indicators resulting from Council priorities, our strategic plan, as well as our other guiding documents. To that end, what you will see throughout the balance of tonight's presentation is that our GMs will focus on 4 impactful key performance quadrants for their respective departments. In addition to impact, they will also speak to the outcome to each of these key performance quadrants. So first up, we have corporate services. Over to Ms. McKinney.
Thank you, Nandini. The key areas of the 2021 corporate services budget build directly on the key areas of the 2020 budget. So it does include some references to currently funded projects and aligns to Council's priorities related to financial sustainability, digital services, and enhanced communications. The 2021 budget request emphasized the ongoing need for digital transformation and digital government, workforce planning and optimization, as well as the role corporate services has and continues to play in organizational governance and compliance. This focus continues to be at the forefront of the work corporate services continues to drive forward as an enterprise service provider. The 2020 budget included the pillars of connecting infrastructure, assets, and people, easy to access services, information, and data in modern formats, engaging the community in the process, and the need to integrate services, data, and tools. These quadrants that you see today are arguably even more relevant in the present and post-pandemic world than ever before. And there's an African proverb that says, in times of crisis, the wise build bridges and the foolish build dams. And in 2020, I would suggest that Team Orangeville build a lot of bridges by doing what the government is accused of often not being able to do. Coming together quickly, rapidly breaking down silos, pivoting to offer services in new ways as we continue to adjust to changing information, and reaching out to new partners to rethink of some of what we do and deliver efficiencies. And everyone had a role in this, but it was supported directly by the existing foundation that was being executed on through the Digital First program and digital transformation. Next slide, please. I love that this quadrant happened to be red, because if you cannot get this right, you cannot pass go. You may be able to collect $200, but I can assure you it won't be as effectively as you or your residents may want in the 21st century. You cannot modernize externally if you do not have your internal house in order. And digital transformation is at the heart of 21st century government modernization, making processes and services easier to use and deliver for staff, making things less time consuming and more secure. Simply put, modernization internally will make people's lives easier and less manual, but it was supported directly by the existing foundation that was being executed on through the Digital First program and digital transformation. Next slide, please. I'll just wait till that's over. This quadrant happened to be red, because if you cannot get this right, you cannot pass go. You may be able to. Okay. So modernizing internally makes people's jobs easier, less manual, less paper, more digital. That frees people up for higher value work and should result in improved staff experience. If it doesn't, then you need to look at how things are being done again. The investments in corporate-wide digitization, enterprise asset management, and that one's fully funded, are just a couple of the major initiatives currently underway that will see a lot of progress in 2020, as well as the ongoing investment, the requirements of our information technology, infrastructure, and assets. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry, I'm gonna go back one. Can we go back to digital government? Thank you. Digital government is about increasing online services and website evolution, modernizing the user experience for residents, businesses, and tourists, similar to the experience they would have in the private sector, be that retail, banking, the news, and so on. Certainly some new services were launched in 2020, but we need to continue to enhance those services and their content and their functions, or it will go stale and we will not reach our goal. So this is about improved access to town services and information, meeting those evolving expectations, and positioning the town as customer-centered service provider. Next slide, please. Corporate services, as I've said previously, is both an enabler as well as a gatekeeper, and that brings us to governance and compliance. Plays a lead role in a number of corporate processes, and supporting corporate governance, it has an accountability as it relates to compliance, be that legislative or to internal processes and procedures. And two key initiatives that are focused on this slide are asset management program and the records management programs. Both of those are on the way. Asset management is fully funded, but the work of the acquisition of an end-to-end asset management system, as well as a comprehensive update to the town's asset management plan led by Treasury, will take place in 2021. These are critical to lifecycle planning and legislative compliance. Now, records management, also well underway with some additional asks for 2021. The clerk and her team have done a tremendous job organizing the town's records, which is step one of digitization. And both of these major bodies of work support automating processes, reducing risk, and ensuring compliance, while improving the use of staff time. Next slide, please. So based on the events of the last year, I think we can all say that Orangeville has definitely got talent, but having talent is not enough. You have to keep it. you have to develop it, and you have to continue to attract it. So there's funding in the 2021 budget that focuses on workforce planning as Orangeville looks to remain competitive and attract and retain talent. And with that, I'd like to say that, in 2020, we talked about how corporate services has had the opportunity to come together to be the team that supports the whole team. And I think we've really done that in the last year. That is definitely one part of workforce optimization, but I would like to say thank you to everyone. Now, our next slide is a summary of the 2021 asks. You can see our new asks are 280, of which 91% of that is funded through reserves and reserve funds. And that concludes my section of the presentation.
Thank you, Andrea. Good evening, Council, Mayor and Council. I'll take the Community Services from here, Nandini. If you could move the slide, please. Thank you. So as we're into the 4 quadrants, it's interesting that we're now in Community Services, and Community Services, not unlike any other department, probably more so from a service provision perspective, had a huge impact in 2020, and will have continued to have an impact in 21. I'll start off the service delivery model, given that it's been a very challenging year in 2020, and we see that as another challenging year in 21. And community services, of course, made up of 5 divisions. All 5 divisions are very service driven. If you take each one from a economic development perspective and our impact on business and on the community, and the libraries, impact on the community again, and trying to serve the public through a different means, whatever way we could, and using innovation as much as possible. Fire, of course, for the most part, it still is in lockdown, and our crew, all firefighters and trainers and so on, have been working in our building in lockdown and delivering services without fail, and everyone's staying healthy. Facilities, a non-stop operation, trying to keep all facilities going with PPE and so on and so forth throughout the entire operation, and maintaining all buildings and delivering services where possible. And of course, the recreation events, trying to inject activities in the community, things like concert series and so on and so forth, to try to keep things moving in terms of programming and activities to the community themselves. From a life cycle replacement perspective, when you look at lifestyle replacement, not unlike other parts of the operation, one of our largest areas, of course, that we are impacted in life cycle is our facilities and our asset management. And our mandate is to be great stewards of all those assets, all those town facilities, parks, and so on. And some major projects, and I'll get into those in a little while in the next slides. In the area of support, projected growth, although there's areas of support to stimulate the town's growth, none more so than the economic development area. And we've got a great emphasis this year on trying to continue that growth. And in all areas, I think what we're probably looking at is a reframing, what I call reframing and rethinking, and maybe a reimagining of how we deliver services across all areas of our operation. And our budget speaks to that. And all of the things from economic development to libraries to recreation to facilities to fire, we've been challenged to take a look at how we operate and how we continue to operate in 2021 and beyond. And finally, from a community wellness perspective, all the quadrants impact community wellness and well-being. It influences how the community thinks in terms of quality of services, quality and the livability of the community, how people move throughout the neighborhoods, how people move throughout the community, how they access services, how they get to facilities, and how they access all the divisions, whether it be facilities, libraries, economic development, culture, the fire, or recreation and events. Next one, Nandini. The service delivery model. One of the big projects for us in 2021, and we started in 2020, is the fire station replacement. This will be a facility that's designed for our future growth in the town and for our neighboring municipalities that we service by contract. This one impacts our overall safety and well-being of all residents and business, and of course visitors to our community. Outcome-wise, it creates an optimal site for fire prevention. Right now, we work in a 9,000 square foot facility that's bordering on 50 years of age at the end of its life in terms of trying to deliver services in that building. And we're now looking at building a 20,000 square foot building on another location that we're continuing to work at. And that building will contain all the services under one roof, including our operations center, the Emergency Operations Center, EOC, and it would increase a lot of operation efficiencies right across the board, from training to prevention to fire suppression. Next slide. Lifestyle replacement, our major project, as you know, in the 2021 that again we launched and council approved in 20, was the replacement of the Alder pool liners with a stainless steel system. Lots of efficiencies in energy consumption, sustainability of the aquatic infrastructure, optimal functionality of the aquatic space. Some of the outcomes for that would be we'll deliver more programs. The larger pool, having 8 lanes, will not only deliver more program space for our own internal programs, but also more space for groups such as the swim team. And the optimal use of all the space within that environment will drive revenue, create new programs, and accommodate other programs going forward. Next slide. Projected growth, I alluded to this in my opening comments. In this particular budget, we want to speak to our tourism branding and community improvement plan, and the revitalization and enhancement of our community downtown core. I know we all attended the BIA meeting a few nights ago, and one of the big things coming out of that was the impact of tourism on the future development of the community, certainly in the downtown. And this is a big area for us in terms of how we can bring tourism along and create a stronger economic base, improve our quality of life for residents and for visitors, and stimulate more private investment. Cross linkage to the CIP through tourism is very important to how we do business. Community improvement plan, we're looking at doing a downtown community improvement plan in 2021. Potentially going into the outskirts and going in industrial areas, depending on how the budget can take us to, if budget can take us that far. But our intention is to go as far as we can doing a community improvement plan across all the sectors, retail, tourism, the arts, hospitality, and accommodation sectors. Next. From a community wellness perspective, one of our major projects, of course, we continue to do in 21 is development of our trail system, which supports neighborhood and community livability, walkability, and bikeability, while connecting neighborhoods and connecting the community, and not just in Orangeville, but Orangeville to all areas around the border of Orangeville, in all directions, east, west, north, and south, connecting other trails. And of course, this is a big impact on community health, and it gets people moving. It helps to decrease obesity and other health issues and conditions. It enhances physical activity levels, and it will obviously have a decline in our traffic congestion, which is something near and dear to Doug's plans. And that's something that we're working on diligently with the trail plan. Next slide, please. If you look at our budget in terms of the pie, most of our funding sources, these big projects such as the fire station and the pool, is being funded through financing and through reserves. As you can see, there's 53% in financing and 31% from reserves, 5% from development charges, and the remainder of our projects are being funded through taxation, 11%. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Good evening, Mayor Brown, members of council, and residents who are watching online virtually. Capital projects are a big part of infrastructure services. We are responsible for many millions of dollars worth of assets that must be maintained, renewed, and upgraded on a continual basis. Infrastructure services oversees roads and associated infrastructure, including everything from streetlights to noise fence to traffic signals. We oversee water supply and distribution infrastructure, including fire hydrants, wells, storage reservoirs, to name but a few. And we oversee wastewater collection and treatment infrastructure, including sewage pumping stations, sewers, and of course the water pollution control plant. Next slide, please. Capital projects in the 2021 infrastructure services capital budget fall into one of 4 main categories: modernization, asset renewal, health and safety, and capacity building. A couple of examples of each type of project are provided on the next 4 slides. Next slide, please. Modernization. Technology is always improving. While we only replace assets when they're approaching the end of their useful life, it's important to take advantage of technological improvements to meet the expectations of our residents and to increase efficiency. In addition, rules and regulations continually evolve. Our assets must be modernized to meet the ever-evolving regulatory environment. A couple of examples of capital projects that are in this category are electric fleet vehicle charging stations, which will allow us to modernize the small vehicle fleet used by building and bylaw staff when those cars are up for replacement in 2022. The outcome of this project will assist in meeting climate change challenges and the commitments that Council has made to the Partners for Climate Change Protection Program and the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy. Water meter billing upgrades is a multi-year project to replace the water meters that were installed throughout the town in 2002 with smarter meters. The outcome of this project will be a network of meters that will assist in making residents and staff aware of issues sooner and resulting in a reduction in water loss. Next slide, please. The majority of our capital projects can be characterized as asset renewal. It's critical to optimize the timing of asset renewal to minimize costs and to maximize benefit. With a large inventory of roads, water mains, and sewers, having regular annual renewal projects has a direct impact on both the town's infrastructure deficit and the level of service provided to our residents. The first example provided on this slide are the roads that we propose to include in our annual road resurfacing program. And the second example is the refurbishment of digester number 2 at the water pollution control plant. The completion of asset renewal projects in infrastructure services will maintain levels of service on our roads and for our water and wastewater systems. Next slide, please. Water, wastewater, and roads assets all have a direct impact on the health and safety of the public. Waterworks capital projects provides for a robust and abundant safe drinking water supply for our residents. Wastewater projects ensure high quality treatment that enhances environmental protection. And capital projects to road infrastructure enhances the safety for drivers, pedestrians, and cyclists. Staff annually includes upgrades to our inventory for traffic signals as part of our capital program, and that's one of the examples on this slide. This year, we propose to do upgrades to 2 sets of traffic signals on First Street, the outcome of which will be safer intersections. Staff have also proposed a capital project to rehabilitate and optimize our existing wells. The reestablishment of some lost capacity will lead to a more robust water supply. Next slide, please. Capacity building. It is necessary to prepare for growth. Whether it's the widening of a road or adding new wells, the town's infrastructure must continually grow to accommodate that growth. It should be noted that in this category, many of the capacity building projects are funded by development charges. The construction of the Hanson Boulevard Bridge over Lower Monora Creek will build capacity in the transportation network by facilitating the completion of Hanson Boulevard between Veterans Way and Blind Line. It should be noted that while this bridge is moving forward, the connection between Blind Line and Veterans Way will only be complete when the road is constructed as part of the Edgewood Valley 2B subdivision. Adding an additional well to the town's water supply system will also build capacity by increasing the amount of water that is available to allocate to growth. Next slide, please. Infrastructure Services has many capital projects that involve hiring consultants to prepare design drawings and specifications that are then used to call for tenders. Only after a tender is awarded do we move to construction. All of this activity takes time, and as a result, numerous projects undertaken by Infrastructure Services are multi-year projects. This is one of the reasons why considerable capital funding has been carried forward from previous years. That said, there are a number of new asks this year on the right-hand column, shaded in yellow. And to highlight a few of the new asks for 2021, in roads, we are looking for funds to reconstruct Centennial Road and to construct the Hanson Boulevard Bridge, as mentioned earlier. we're looking to purchase 2 new transit buses. In water, we're looking to rehabilitate our elevated storage facilities, replace water meters, and work towards the addition of a new well. And the main new ask in wastewater is the renewal of digester number 2 at the Water Pollution Control Plant. Thank you, and at this point, I will hand it back over to our treasurer.
Syed, you're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Is my screen still visible?
Yes, we have, thank you, we'll see you tomorrow.
Okay, so sorry, Mr. Mayor, I'm just moving back and forth between slides here. So what I was going to say is that that concludes our presentation for tonight. And before I open the floor for Q&A, I would like to thank my fellow presenters, Ms. McKinney, Mr. Osmond, and Mr. Jones for joining me tonight. Just a quick reminder, tomorrow night we will be back with the operating budget, and I will also bring a recommendation for our consolidated budget. And that said, over to you, Your Worship. Thank you once again.
Thank you very much, Madam Treasurer and our general managers for that presentation tonight. So, councillors, we've all had a chance to review this. Are there any questions? I see Deputy Mayor McIntosh in the queue, followed by Councillor Andrews. Deputy Mayor, go right ahead.
Thank you, Worship. This is to Mr. Jones. With the ongoing pandemic, do you see any delay in the water meter replacement program? Or do you anticipate any extra problems because of it?
Mr. Jones.
Through you, Your Worship, to the Deputy Mayor. At this point, we are still in the technology selection process. We are just going out now for a consultant to take that assignment on. And to be 100% honest, once the technology is selected and we start moving into the replacement phase of the project, it really depends on where we're at with the pandemic. I mean, certainly if we were in a position right now to move forward with replacing water meters, I don't think we would be actually going into people's houses to do it right now. I don't think we would be permitted. Hopefully, the pandemic will quiet down, and by the time we get to starting to replace those water meters, there won't be an impact. But I can't say for any certainty.
Thank you.
Very good. Councillor Andrews.
Thank you very much, Your Worship, and I'd like to again just compliment all the general managers, including our treasurer, for the information that has been provided prior to tonight's meeting and answering some questions also prior, and also for your presentation this evening too. Your Worship, can we start to get into some of the nitty-gritty or the weeds, or is this more high level this evening, just for clarification?
I think you can ask probing questions. Go ahead, Councillor.
Great, thank you. The first question would be to Mr. Jones regarding some of the infrastructure services. And I've, as my fellow members of council have no doubt gone into a lot of time to review the information. I started looking at some of the different road reconstruction projects, and I know the importance of them being at a standard that would be expected in a community of our size and throughout the community itself. But one that came to mind were some of the laneways, and these were, for example, in between some of the developments, the laneways themselves. Is there a standard when it comes to the type of asphalt that is used in those particular applications? Because again, I know that this is not a big ask, but it's one that does that fall on the shoulders of the developer when those particular projects are started, and then we're then liable for the repairs, because some of those laneways don't, in my opinion, seem to be highly traveled in comparison to some of our other town roads that we have.
Mr. Jones.
Through Your Worship, to Councillor Andrews, I'll answer part of the question, and I will defer the last part to Mr. Lackey. With respect to the development of lanes, Anytime there is a new development in town, the developers are responsible for doing all the design and construction work for the roads, or if there's laneways, as there is in Montgomery Village, for those laneways. Town staff review all of the engineering design drawings and approve those. So it isn't really up to them what type of surface it is. It's something that we need to approve before it goes in. With respect to the type of asphalt that's used in the laneways, I'm not 100% sure. Perhaps I could defer that part to Mr. Lackey.
Mr. Lackey.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through to Councillor Andrews. Yes, there is a certain standard that we use. There's a certain depth of asphalt that is applied, and there's a certain depth of granular that is used to ensure that they carry the traffic that is necessary. And what these rear laneways are used for is access to the homes. They are used regularly every day. They are rather unique in the fact that they have reverse grades to them. They drain to the center of the laneway, and this does present some drainage issues, which we live with, and that contributes somewhat to the deterioration of the laneways.
Okay. That's,
I trust that answers your question.
Very much so, Mr. Lackey, and again, Mr. Jones. And again, that's what I thought, having the opportunity of driving through some of those, just again for my curiosity, because if there's a design, not to imply in any way that there's a design flaw, but I know that these have come up in previous budget deliberations. I also have one more question, Your Worship, that I'd like to pose to Mr. Jones in regards to the EV charging stations. I did notice that there was one that was highlighted in the budget package that didn't have a lot of detail other than it was highlighted, and I couldn't figure out where it was being located. But I also wanted to commend your foresight and looking towards the future on a EV charging system to assist with the eventual capital replacement of the vehicles that are going to be replaced at some point. Could you provide some clarification on where that EV charging station is going to be, or is this something that would be part of the Public Works location itself?
Through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Andrews, the intent is to construct 3 of these stations, and they would be located at the Operations Center in Town Hall. This is actually being funded approximately 50% through a grant. And when we submitted the grant, we identified that there would be 2 located at the Operations Center and 1 at Town Hall. Although we do understand that if we want to change that up a little bit, that's something that is also permissible. These charging stations are specifically to be used for municipal fleet vehicles. That's what the grant funding was for.
Okay. Well, thank you. I may have some other questions a little bit later on, Your Worship, but I'll let my fellow council members pose some questions as well.
Okay, we've got Councillor Post, then Peters, then Sherwood. Councillor Post, go right ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I'll start with just a couple of questions too. I wanted to start first with a comment, which was how pleased I was to see the inclusion of $30,000 for the Orangeville Opera House accessibility ramp. I think any time that we can invest in making our community more accessible and inclusive is a win. So just thank you for adding that in. I do have a couple of questions for Mr. Osmond, and I'll start with the first one is regarding Rebecca Hills Park. I see $140,000 included in the budget for that park, and a note that park staff would like to hire a consultant to make some decisions about that park. So just a curious question is, how much do you estimate will be used on a consultant, and how much of the remaining 140 will be for the development of the park? And are we expecting that completion of this project will happen throughout 2021?
Mr. Osmond.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Worship. Through to Councillor Post, this is a great question. And first off, let me say that the consultant word sometimes gets taken out of context. In this case, the $140,000, I think off the top of my head, $140,000 for that project is primarily to do the actual work on the site. We would engage the services of a landscape architect to do that project, and what we were more concerned about was making sure we had the full input from the neighborhood while doing that project. So we like to have some consulting work on the front end in some of the design pieces that's going to work within that park. And through the master plan, of course, we had quite a bit of feedback from those residents in that area about what exactly they would like to see, everything from splash pads to playground expansions to open green space to blacktop areas. And we want to make sure that as we coordinate those pieces that we get that design right, so that it's good for the long term. And we would use the landscape architect, in this case, / consultant, to engage and get our drawings right before we go to tender and do the pieces that way. So it would be more of an hands-on project, if you would. I wouldn't think we'd be spending very many dollars in the front end, maybe somewhere around 20,000 at most in terms of trying to do the layout, and it would mostly be in tender calls and so on.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Sorry, Councillor Post, and it would be our intent to have this finished in 2021, yes.
Wonderful. Mr. Mayor, is it okay if I ask one more question, or do you want me to go back in queue?
Go right ahead, Councillor.
Thank you. My next question is also for Mr. Osman. I see $50,000 included in the budget for the Alexandra Park Development Plan. I'm just curious where we are in the consultation process with the Legion. I was a little taken aback to see that actually included in the budget, because I didn't feel like as a council we had moved that project forward quite at this time. So I was a little surprised to see $50,000 for the development of that park, or for the consultation process of the development of that park. So I'm just curious where we are with discussions with the Legions and other stakeholders about it. It's a bit of a controversial item in the budget, so I just want to make sure we're doing our due diligence with our stakeholders before we move forward $50,000 towards that project, especially with the constraints that we're under this year.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through to Councillor Pulse. It's a, as you know, Alexandria Park in the downtown, when it comes to park spaces and special event spaces and so on, is a big concern, big issue that's come up now quite a few times in various areas. Everything from the Broadway discussion on buildings to the Recreation Parks Master Plan, as well as the Tourism Plan. So all three speak to it, and we put it in the budget to do some of the things you're actually referring to. All the engagement of stakeholders, seeing exactly what at the end of the day needs to be done. We've not had because of COVID, we've not had a face-to-face or any discussion with the Legion since the last discussions we did have with them. The final outcome of what happens to that park area should have a fulsome engagement with the stakeholders, including the Legion, in a big way. And I think because we have so many open-ended questions in terms of what happens to Alexandra Park and the surrounding lands, as well as Broadway, we would like to move forward on that now and capture that particular project in line with some other projects that we're dealing with at the same time. That was the intent of trying to deal with the planning up front rather than wait till we have something else done and trigger it again. So some economies doing it all at the same time.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the explanation.
Great. Councillor Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Ms. Syed, just hoping for a broader explanation of the approach with the carry forward projects as they relate to, you know, the ask on the levy versus the overall spending. When we're carrying forward projects from 2020, for example, are we taking those as a surplus in previous years and then re-asking for that money in 2021, or we're just showing the total spend and then only the portion of new projects is the levy amount?
Through your worship to Councillor Peters. Yes, so when you are looking at a carry forward projects, and I think I've mentioned it during the presentation, there is no implication in terms of tax dollars or new ask. So carry forward, may that be from 2020 or prior years, those are already funded by previous budgets. So whether it's funded through reserve or other means, these are committed funds that we bring into the new year.
So if I could just follow up, does that, I guess I'm looking ahead to future years when hopefully we don't have as many rollover projects because we're actually able to accomplish in a year what we're planning to accomplish in a year. And not to take that away from staff, you guys have done a great job this year with all the complications, but is there concern that that will overinflate, I guess on paper, the spend? Will it look like the overall budget has gone up, and then will it essentially taper back in future years, right? If we don't have 5 million of carryover projects, all of a sudden next year it looks like we're spending less, even though the levy may be the same. I was trying to think of how that would play out over several years.
Okay. So again, through your worship to Councillor Peters. So let's see if I can explain this in a different way. So the carryover or carry forward project is not a new concept. A lot of municipalities who are either presenting performance-based budget or moving towards it like ourselves, they present it that way. It's a presentation style. I mean, carry forward project always existed. So in terms of over-inflating our budgetary envelope, I don't think it would work that way. What it simply does, and to really put it in a very simple terms, it shows you the overall work plan or the workload initiative in any given year. Because if we are only showing you the in-year ask, but in reality we're tackling projects that are multi-year in nature, then it doesn't provide council as well as our ratepayer an overall and a realistic picture of what the overall work plan and workload is. So from a financial perspective, just to provide you a very direct answer, there is zero tax dollar implication. There is no additional ask for carry forward. So this is just to present information in a way so that it's more transparent.
Okay, so I think that's because it's a bit of a new presentation style for us. And then, so last item on that point, if you don't mind, there will always be some carry forward and there'll be some multi-year projects, but if I were to project that forward, the goal would be to keep those to a minimum so that projects in year are often are given priority and they're the ones that are being completed on time, and that's the concept, I suppose, moving forward of the performance-based approach.
Absolutely. Again, through your worship to Councillor Peters. Clearly, most of these projects are multi-year by design. So some roadworks and water wastewater works project requires more than 1 year, and I think Mr. Jones spoke to that effect. So like I said, most of them are by design. Now, clearly there will be some in-year projects that would be either delayed for a variety of reasons, right? So the aim is always to make sure the in-year projects are completed within the year. However, there will be times when these projects will be carried forward. But to go back to your original point, will this overinflate the budget? No.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Sherwood.
Yes, Your Worship, thank you. Through you, I was wondering if we could take the same approach with the capital budget this year as we did last year, where we go by department, and rather than jump from department to department and councillor to councillor, if we went to the summary page of the capital projects within each department, and then you just call or someone call to see if a councillor has a question on a specific item. Because I don't know about other councillors, but I have several notes throughout the document. I'd rather start at the top and come down, and rather than, you know, jump to parks and with one councillor and then chart facilities with another councillor. Can we do like we did last year, where we go to the capital budget summaries and by department, starting at the beginning of the document, and then you ask questions if a councillor has questions? That would require putting the budget document up on the screen and then going summary by department, the capital budget summaries. That's what we did last year, and it flowed very nicely that way.
Okay, I like that idea, Councillor Sherwood. Why don't we let Councillor Taylor ask one question, and maybe we can recap with Ms. Syed putting the report up on the screen after Councillor Taylor. Councillor Taylor, do you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I wonder, as I think about what Councillor Sherwood just said, to be honest with you, that would be much easier for me too. There's a bunch of different things that I'd like to go through, and I wonder if we just delay what I was going to ask and do it in a more orderly fashion, if that might be better for everyone.
All right, Ms. Syed, do you think you could do that for us? Put that recap up.
So, Your Worship, from my understanding, what councillors are asking me is to bring up the document on the screen so that we can navigate through it back and forth. Is that the ask?
Correct. That's correct. Yeah.
Your Worship, if you would give me just one moment so that I can load that. Thank you.
To me, Your Worship, if I may.
Go ahead.
Yeah. My suggestion to you is that you know, you would call out the initiative. If no one wants to speak to it, then we simply move on. And if someone does want to speak to it, then we can debate it. But otherwise, it seems like we're all over the map here. So it's
just jumping all
like the
over.
suggestion.
Yeah, jumping all over is just a little bit too much. I think last year it flowed very nicely when we went from the top of the budget down, just the capital budget summaries.
Right. So on the list that I've got, first item would be the corporate-wide digitization, for instance, at $30,000.
Well, like I say, we go through each department in order of the budget. Just the capital budget summaries, Madam Treasurer?
Absolutely. Your Worship, can you confirm that you can see my screen now?
Yes, we can.
So as I'm navigating through this document, I will be looking for your direction, and I think Councillor Sherwood would like to go department by department, just the capital budget summary. Is that correct, Councillor Sherwood?
Right, yeah, we're not talking operating tonight, so we just want to look at the capital budget, and then if any councillors have a note on that in that specific department, it's going in chronological order, kind of as the document is being presented.
Okay, Your Worship. So first up would be corporate services, and under corporate services, the first capital summary is finance. So I will pause to see if there's any question.
No, I don't believe so.
Okay.
Sorry, did we miss, is corporate allocations capital part of that?
Yes,
That was
I have to go back then. Thank you.
I don't have a question there. I want to be complete.
Okay. So do you want me to go to corporate allocation?
Yeah, yes, please.
Okay, thank you.
Right.
Right, so yeah, start at the very, very beginning and go through every capital budget summary. Perfect.
So councillors were agreed on this? It appears so. So IT maybe is next?
Your Worship, if I'm driving this, I would like to go through corporate services and then whatever it's chronological, like Councillor Schultz. Yeah, thank you. So finance is next under corporate services.
Okay.
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 Moving along, we have clerks. Okay.
Very good. Thank you.
All right. Moving along, we have bylaw.
Yes. Any questions, councillors? Oh, we're good. Thank you.
Your Worship. Next up is IT.
Okay.
Moving along. Just bear with me. We do not have any capital project for human resources, and I do not believe there's any capital project for communication. So that would conclude the corporate services part for capital summary.
Very good. Thank you.
Your Worship, can I move on to community services then?
Please.
Thank you. So first up, we have fire. And just bear with me.
Councillors, any questions on these items?
I do have one.
Okay.
Your Worship. Thank you. In regards to the radio system, is that a complete replacement of the whole radio system for that 175, or is that just partial?
Through you, Worship, to Deputy Mayor, that's a complete replacement. That's the 175 from last year. We carried forward to make the complete project, so this is for the full project in 2021. That's all radios, all the radio replacement. Yes.
Right. Did the radios, through you, Your Worship, did the radios get replaced last year, or is this just going to be all done at once?
All done at once. All done at once, Your Worship.
Okay, if I could ask one more question then. Because we were working with the police at the time, we stayed with a digital radio system. Has there been any thought to going back to analog? Much cheaper, and we found it to be a little bit more reliable, but we went to digital because we went in with the police department at the time. Has there been any thought to that?
Your Worship, through Deputy Mayor, one of the things we're going to do before we do the final project on the radios is actually to engage with the radio expertise on some of the digital/analog systems, and this is a replacement for our radios. Maybe Deputy Mayor might be aware. These are radios that get used mostly by suppression firefighters on the scene and so on to go into the into structures and so on and so forth. So these are critical units, and the ones we have now are at end of life. And you're asking some of the same questions we are, and we will be due diligence on this would be to do some homework on the front end to make sure that we had the right system, both digital and analog system, that can do the work of the fire suppression in particular when they're on scene. This is a system that we're dealing with now, and IT will be supporting us on this and actually putting together the package. And the new systems, the new radio systems, are primarily digital, but they're really up to date in terms of where they would be in the next 10 to 15 years. So these are up to date systems. But it's a good point. It is something we're concerned about, making sure that we have the most flexible system that we can purchase.
Thank you for that.
Okay. Any other questions, Councillor? Councillor Sherwood.
Yes, Your Worship. I have two questions. Back to the fire radios. Were we able to use any of the the police radios? Like when we disbanded, I would assume that we couldn't use any of those radios. OPP would have their own system. What happened to those radios? Can we use them?
Your Worship, through to Councillor Sherwood, no, we cannot use the radios that were used by policing. We can use some of the capital equipment that came out of that system for use on towers, that kind of thing. But that's as far as it goes. We can't use the actual radios themselves. No, they're not set up for the same operation as fire.
Okay. Yeah, I thought when Deputy Mayor was talking with the police, I thought it was the same system and that we could use their radios. So my next question is regarding the fire station, and there's 7.4 million in the 2021 and 3.4 million in 2022. Is that just for the building itself, or does that include purchasing of the land?
That includes land as well, Your Worship.
Thank you.
Sure, yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions, councillors? Okay, let's move along, Madam Treasurer.
Okay, next up is library.
Do we have any questions, councillors, on this item? Councillor Taylor and then Councillor Sherwood.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I guess through yourself to Mr. Osmond, I'm just curious how the setup went this year with, I see different allocations came into, I guess that now it's going to be an operating question. Sorry, maybe I'm on the wrong page. Maybe that's for tomorrow night, isn't it, with the allocations? I apologize, excuse me. I'll hold for 24 hours.
Okay.
My apologies.
Councillor Sherwood.
So my question, Your Worship, is on page 89 of the budget regarding the library rebranding. Budgeted cost of $35,000. It's in the it's on page 89 for the description of the capital request. If you want to go to the worksheet, Madam Treasurer, on page 89, right there, the library branding project. So I see further down that tourism is also going to be asking for branding on page 96. So I'm just wondering, what's the reasoning for this being required?
Your Worship, through the Councillor Sherwood, in the case of the, well, you're right, there's two branding exercises, if you would. One towards tourism, particularly in the business community and downtown and so on, and the other is the library. The library we haven't really looked at the library since back in the 90s when you first got into doing branding, if you would, in the biggest sense of the word. And when you look at the word branding here, it's about not just branding in terms of logos or what the the communication looks like for libraries. It also takes a look at where libraries are going, what the vision is for libraries, and what our market is going to look like going forward in the future. And one of the things we learned through the COVID experience is that, as an example, the benefit of using the virtual world to deliver our services, the benefit of doing things on curbside, the benefit of changing how we do business with the community. And so it's very timely for us to take a look at how we deliver services in the library and what that brand looks like to the public and to our community. And the other thing about the library brand is that when we looked at it, it came as one of the top 3 program demands, if you would, or things that the community were looking forward to using. And in the master plan, it came through loud and clear. And one of the things, though, that came out of that was, well, what does your future library look like? Not just your library program and service, but how do you deliver that service? And how do you market that service? And are you using the best mediums to your advantage to get that service out there in the public? And so things are changing. And what the idea is here from a library perspective is take a look at working with all of our stakeholders, all the collaboration with stakeholders, both neighboring municipalities, as well as organizations they work with and so on and so forth, as well as how our staff actually works within the community. So the branding piece is really, in a broad sense, looking at the vision for libraries, rethinking how we do things in the future, and then delivering on that. And this would be a strategy, if you would, or a plan that would also be a brand in that sense in terms of what the library looks like in the community. So that's why we're doing it now. It's also timely because we did learn from COVID, and we think that coming out of COVID, the post-COVID experience will be a little different, and then we deliver those services. So we want to do it in 21, be ready for 22 and getting to rebuild our library program back.
Just to follow up, Your Worship, is it a little premature to do that without waiting and seeing what we may be doing as far as the library at Alder Street? Because with the, we may be rethinking how we're operating the Alder Street Library once Humber leaves. Your Worship, through to Councillor Sherwood, actually, it makes more argument for why you should do it, because in actual fact, the physical footprint, if you look at things from a physical footprint, delivery facility in particular, it'd be good to do the program content piece to see what exactly you want to fit in that spatial area, if you would. So as an example would be, you're quite right. If you look back at our ICIP project, we had designed a 15,000 square foot building on the first floor of Alder, would be an expansion in libraries. One of the things that did, it would actually trigger a good conversation, if you would, in the community about what libraries would look like in the future and whether or not it would be at Alder or whether or not you can take care of your needs at Mill Street. And this, looking at our brand and our vision, will give you a lot of the answers you need in order to go across that next threshold in terms of what you do at Alder, how you repurpose the space at Alder, and what you do in the downtown in terms of delivery of the service throughout the community. So I'd say no better time now than to do the planning than during 21 to be prepared for the future.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions on library, councillors? Seeing none. Councillor Andrews, can you say something so you'll come up on my screen?
Absolutely. Hello there. I'm here.
Okay, thank you.
Camera's on.
Yeah, very good. Okay, let's move on then. Go ahead, Madam Treasurer.
So next up is economic development. I do not believe there is any capital project for a crossing guard, so we'll move on to economic development.
Any questions, councillors? Councillor Sherwood, go ahead.
Yes, Your Worship. So again, if we go further down to page 96, this going back to the tourism branding, again, a $20,000 ask. Is it really necessary at this time?
Your Worship, through you to Councillor Sherwood, we are bringing forward the branding piece for tourism in Orangeville based on the recommendation coming out of the Tourism Strategic Plan, as well as the feedback we're getting from the BIA and other stakeholders. That's been triggered, and also to go forward a little further with the conversation that came out of the Roger Brooks report. And tourism in this case is seen as a major business driver into the future. And again, we need to define that. Well, what does that look like? What's our tourism brand going to be? And again, we're in 2021. It's a great planning year. We're still in the midst of a pandemic. It gives us the opportunity to plan. We've proven through the tourism strategic plan that we just did and completed, the work plan, that during COVID we were successful in getting that done, and we had great input from all our stakeholders and from the public. And we see doing the similar thing now. But I think the time to prepare for the next stage, if you would, in growing our economy is to do the work in a year where we're trying to prepare to jumpstart our business community in particular. And we think that tourism is one of the major drivers of that, as shown by the strategic plan for tourism. And our intent is to move on to the next step. And the next step would be to do the branding piece for tourism and see how we would develop from here.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Osmond. Any further questions, councillors?
I have one there, Your Worship.
Go ahead, Councillor Andrews.
It's not a question, it's again just a comment to Mr. Osmond's remarks and supporting the need for the branding process for the tourism area. I think the tourism strategy report was very clear, and also, as Mr. Osmond talked about, as we've gone through the period of COVID, it will be absolutely necessary that we're prepared for what happens post-COVID. So I think that this is a worthwhile expenditure in this particular line item.
Thank you. Okay, seeing no further questions, go right ahead, Madam Treasurer.
Thank you, Worship. Next up is Facilities and Parks. So, Your Worship, this is 2 pages worth of information. So I'm just going to land on 1 page so that, you have something in front of you, and if the councillor has any questions.
Right, councillors, Councillor Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Mr. Osmond, we started sort of this conversation offline, but hoping you can elaborate on the council chamber upgrades in terms of why they're required at this time, given we've only been in that space for a year. So what new systems do we have that we're trying to catch up on, and what sort of things weren't implemented in the first renovation that were missed, and perhaps why were they missed? This seems like an awfully big line item to come on the heels of that renovation that was just completed 18 months ago.
Mr. Osmond.
Your Worship, through to Councillor Peters. Well, first of all, I don't think they were missed. I think what we have now is we found that doing as much as we've been doing in the past few months through COVID and through virtual operation is that our capacity to deliver with our current system is not quite large enough. And some of our digital systems in the chamber are not delivering the way they should deliver. And if we're taking on such large audiences and delivering across larger groups with more stakeholders on and people coming on this system, that the chamber itself needs quite a bit of work in terms of cabling, more, if you would, more anchored assets, because right now we have some mobile pieces in the chamber, and there'd be cabling. There would be some new microphones that would cut out background noise and so on. Some of the issues we've had with echoing in the chamber and that kind of thing, we need a little bit of redesign and tweaking. Some of our cameras, some of the things that you look at when you're in the chamber in terms of the screens and so on, more monitors, more TV monitors inside. And that's the sort of thing where we're doing. It's somewhere between $50,000 and $60,000 depending on the final outcome of the project. The other thing that we want to do is, because we're moving around the furniture, is that we have systems in the floor that we want to improve on and enhance, so that we can again deliver a better quality, digital quality program coming out of the chamber. And this is more of an IT project, but the way the budget works is that IT will provide me with the needs, because it's a facility piece at the end of the day, has to be anchored down by the facility side. So we're delivering the actual project on behalf of IT, so it's a collaboration. This was something that's been discussed for the last few months, particularly after meetings when you're having difficulty with your meetings. And we think that the work we're talking about doing would enhance the delivery of the service, if you would, or program coming out of the chamber itself in these kinds of environments we're in right now.
So if you don't mind a quick follow-up, have we been in chambers long enough to know what needs to be done? Like in terms of the upgrades, like we don't have a lot of experience in that space. So again, I worry that we'll jump to a conclusion on what sort of aspects we want incorporated into the chambers, only to find after another 6 months of operation in it that maybe we didn't catch everything we needed to again. So I just wonder if another year of experience is worthwhile in this case.
Your worship, again, it's a matter of downtime in terms of being able to get in that chamber and do the work while you're not in the building and where you're not in the space, because we have to do some work and we have to cut walls and put in cables and so on and so forth. So this is a matter of getting the work done while you're not in the chamber. And I don't disagree that maybe if you're in the chamber we can find some more issues, but right now, based on IT's experience in working with these meetings, they've identified the concerns and issues, and they've put forward a project that would basically clean up some of the problems we're having with the virtual meeting world, and also with some of the things happening in the chamber and moving things around, and some more cameras to give a better feel and to the public when they're seeing these meetings and being engaged in the meetings. It also works, if you would, Councillor Peters, it also works from the external in. So when you call in to a meeting, the benefit of being able to do these meetings in the long term for other type meetings is that we can do it with better technology. And right now the technology, we need to catch up to where the technology is for the next few years. So that's the intent. And again, do it while we're in downtime.
Right.
Thank you. Looks like we have Councillor Andrews again, and then Councillor Taylor. Councillor Andrews.
Thank you, Your Worship, and appreciate the responses from Mr. Osmond, but I am going to pose some additional questions to you, Mr. Osmond, as well. This is pertaining to the rooftop replacement unit. If you could provide just a little bit of explanation behind the reasoning for this. This is a rather hefty price tag of about $800,000, if I'm not mistaken. And I see a sequence of additional expenses right through till 2025 and beyond. If you could provide an explanation on the need for that, and then I do have a second question too as well.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through to Councillor Andrews. The issue we have here is right now we have a unit, RTU Unit 8 is at end of life. That unit is the critical piece that provides the air handling for the pool environment.
Okay.
And that's for the cooling, for the heating, and for the dehumidification of the space. A couple issues right now with that particular unit. First off, if we weren't doing any work with the pool itself, we still need to have that unit replaced. We had that unit in the budget now for the last couple of years, and we're at a critical point now where we need to replace it. We're at a critical point now where we need to replace it because we're also expanding the water volume and air volume, if you would, in the pool itself. With what we're doing in the pool, the timing for the new unit is basically simultaneous with the pool enhancements. And that particular unit is, well, it's the same age as it was put in 2003. So it's been around for quite some years, 17 or 18 years now. And it is beyond life. We had this unit assessed by an HVAC consultant or engineer a couple years ago, and it was at end of life then, and we have done repairs to it, but we can't repair any money repairing it would be a waste of money. The new, what we're looking at in the new unit would be a unit that would be more sustainable in terms of the energy savings and so on. It'd be more of a green unit, if you would, that would enhance the environment, improve the dehumidification in the pool, and improve air handling, and give you a great environment for your pool programs. And that unit is expensive. My best hope, of course, is that it won't come in as high as that, Councillor Andrews, but we are being as conservative as possible because we want to make sure that we get the right unit in that environment.
Yeah, I appreciate the amount of time and effort that you've gone to extend the life of this particular unit. I know that we've had opportunities to discuss this in the past, and I think the timeliness of this, especially with some of the other work that is being done in the pool, it makes absolute sense. The other question is less expensive, but just looking at some logic behind the need for specific vehicles for the Alder location as well as Tony Rose. These are the trucks that were highlighted in the capital budget ask.
Your Worship, through to Councillor Andrews, the trucks at those locations are used not just at the Tony Rose and Alder locations, but because we're a facility operation, we have staff that do work, for the buildings, but they also do work in other buildings. So their own base, if you would. So those trucks now, as an example, in the summertime, we lose a truck. We've been losing a truck at our buildings. We send out to parks because we got a shortage of trucks. In the past year, of course, we had a great shortage of trucks because we can only put one person in the vehicle. But notwithstanding that, we still need the vehicle in those two operations to maintain those buildings, as well as be able to leave those buildings and service other buildings in our inventory, which is right now at 13, 14 buildings. So we're using staff throughout the buildings for different reasons. And they do also use the vehicles, of course, for bringing equipment and supplies back and forth to the buildings. And that's the intent of one replacement and one new one.
I appreciate the cross-departmental usage in this case, and again, thank you, Mr. Osmond, for the clarification. That's all I have.
Thank you, Councillor Andrews. Councillor Taylor, and then Councillor Sherwood. Councillor Taylor.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Would it be okay, Your Worship, just to speak to a few things here? And
go ahead.
Okay. So to Councillor Peters' points on the IT upgrades, I certainly share Councillor Peters' concern about spending the additional funding, but it's been woeful in the situation that we find ourselves in. The technology has been wanting at best. So although I do agree it's a fair amount of money, I think it's necessary that we go forward. So just wanted to make that point. And if I may, Mr. Osmond, on the rooftop replacement, just so I understand, I was in there, my son was still playing hockey, and we were walking out, I guess to be the north side, and water was pouring in through the roof. I assume all of that will be looked after as this is replaced as well, or how will that get looked after in that building?
Mr. Osmond.
Your Worship, through to Councillor Taylor, I'm sorry, I'm not, when you say water pouring into the roof,
it was leaking, garbage cans set up all in that, I guess it'd be the north area up top in the main rink.
Yeah, that's not the unit we're referring to. The unit we're referring to is for the pool environment. It's above the pool itself.
Yep. It's totally different, is it?
It's totally different, yeah. That might have something to do with a particular unit that could be open for some reason. Does that happen recently, or?
Well, the last time we were able to get into the building, so my apologies. We'll move off. We'll move off of it then. But there is an issue there. You're leaking. I guess that's it for this page, Your Worship. Excuse me. The Tony Rose upgrades. I just wanted to make the point. I know it's in 2023, and I appreciate that we try to earmark these things. But if anybody in the public is watching this, I'm not sure Council has agreed on what the plan will be for Tony Rose moving forward. So, as we approve this budget, we're approving 2021, and we're generally looking at a plan outside of that. But we're not approving $2.3 million for Tony Rose here today.
If you would, Your Worship, to Councillor Taylor, basically what we've done, of course, as you know, we're looking at a 10-year projection, and that's all subject to change, of course, as things evolve. And you're absolutely correct. I mean, we are looking at Tony Rose in 21 and what we're going to do going forward, and anything that becomes obsolete obviously would drop out of the budget. But if we were to keep Tony Rose, certain things will have to happen, and these are just placeholders for what could happen in the foreseeable future if you have to maintain that building.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Sherwood.
Yes, Your Worship. I have a couple of questions in the facilities capital. Should I ask one at a time, or can I ask both of them at this time?
Go ahead. You can ask both. Go ahead.
Okay, so the first one is, I'm going to go back similar to what my friend Councillor Andrews had spoke about, and I just wonder if there really is a need for a facilities truck at both Tony Rose and Alder at an expense of $41,000 for a truck at each location. Could we not have just one facilities truck and then see if that's not worked out, and if it doesn't work out, bring it to 2022 if we really feel we have a need to have a second truck?
Mr. Osmond.
Your Worship, at the grace of council, I mean, we're putting forward to you a budget that right now applies to our operation. Any numbers in this budget that you think could be pushed to the future, we would adapt. Right now, we have 2 operations going, both, well, I shouldn't say that, certainly tongue-in-cheek, since we have problems with the COVID, so we don't have our operations fully going. But when we're in full operation, these 2 buildings operate simultaneously, and they operate, and different things happen in each building every day. And staff leave these buildings to go on other sites as well, from could be Alder leaving, could be Tony Rose leaving. And when you don't have a vehicle, on site, they have to wait, and they have to call a vehicle in from PERC somewhere to assist. So right now it's based on optimal use of the vehicles in the buildings. And if we were to not receive funding for 1 or 2 vehicles, then we'd have to readapt and figure out how we would operate without it.
So it's my wish to go to 1 truck with the facility just to see how it works within, but I have to leave that to the rest of my councillors as to whether they are interested in cutting one of those trucks or not. My second point that I would like to see cut or perhaps delayed is the information sheet is located on page 111, and it's the Alder Humber Rooms consultant at a consultant for $30,000. Do we really need a consultant to tell us what we need to those rooms? We've got, you know, youth programs, summer camps. We've got seniors that would use the room. We would like to be able to rent them out. Do we really need a consultant to tell us what to do with those at a cost of $30,000?
Mr. Osmond.
Your Worship, the design of the repurpose, if you would, of the space in the upstairs that is being vacated by Umber. You're all looking at it and you're seeing these rooms. Well, for the future use of these rooms, all these rooms could potentially disappear, and they could be one big space. They could be a space that would be multi-use. Right now, they serve a certain purpose. They serve a education purpose, they serve a classroom purpose, and we rent out those rooms in individual spaces. What is the future use of the upstairs? As you alluded to earlier, we have a library upstairs. We have Saputo Center upstairs. How do these spaces cross-program with each other? How do they feed off each other? Are there any synergies in these spaces? So the idea of a consultant for $30,000 is to redesign and repurpose the space based on our program needs again in the upstairs. That's a huge space, and it will impact the overall use of the building. And that space supplies cross-programming value to the rest of the building, i.e. to the arenas, to the pool, to the library, and so on, in our future to all age groups. And yeah, you could leave the space just as it is, but my argument is it won't be for optimal use. It will be a space that was designed for a certain purpose, and now you're going into a new future, and rethinking what happens in that space means engaging expertise to be objective enough to look at the outside and engage with our stakeholders, engage with the community, and see exactly what we can put in that space upstairs that would be optimal for the future. That's the idea of using a consultant in this case.
That would include public consultation, engagement, Mr. Osmond. You just mentioned that.
That is correct, Your Worship. Public engagement to our stakeholders and to the public in terms of the final analysis with what happens to that space.
I guess, Your Worship, the only reason I'm not really in favor of that, and it's a very minor little amount of money, it's just that, do we really need to be, like, it just seems I hear the word consultant over and over and over and over, and we're spending lots of money for consultants. Do we really need a consultant to tell us what to use that area for? Surely staff would have really good, you and your amazing staff have really good ideas of what you could use it for, and that would save $30,000. That's just my mindset.
Your Worship, if I could, again, it's not just about actually, having a conversation about what it looks like. It's also to give us the layout for it in terms of, well, do we put in all movable walls? Do we put in one big room, two big rooms? Do we get feedback from the public on what they envisage? We've had lots of groups already come back to us as an example, not just the public uses, but also private uses that would be used for engaging with the public. And an example would be, it could be from private therapists, rental space. So what's the business case for that space going forward? And from recreation, as you know it today, and as we see it, recreation has to look at things from a business case perspective. And quite frankly, I mean, if you're going to have a space of that size and magnitude, then you should have a business case. How are you going to develop it, and how are you going to run that going forward? And yes, Councillor Sherwood, I don't disagree with you. We do have quite a bit of professional expertise in-house, but from time to time, it's good to have some of the outside to engage the public and have a outside objective person taking a look at it and putting that plan in place, not just the in terms of the programming plan, but also the physical layout of the plan.
Thank you, Mr. Osmond.
Thank you. I'm thinking, Mr. Osmond, things like an innovation hub that could be tied into library services. I know that the senior center has expressed perhaps a need for additional seniors programming area. But all of that needs to be quantified, and having a consultant do that work for us probably would help us make the right decision there. So thank you. I see Councillor Peters, you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you. Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Mr. Osmond. I'm wondering if you can comment from a general perspective on the facilities turnover to upgraded lighting. 2 years back, we had the major move to LED in Alder. Do we have any large outstanding facilities that have not made the conversion yet? Because I'm not seeing any line items this year or in the future for any lighting upgrades at any of the facilities. Are we all the way there?
We're pretty much there, yeah. Not in recreation spaces, Your Worship. All of our recreation spaces, for the most part, are complete. And we are actually recouping the savings from Alder in particular. One more year and that system will be completely paid for. We're seeing the numbers and the data in our energy savings on lights. So they're all done, including Tony Rose, including all the Alder space and so on. So yeah, they're all done. Our major footprints are done.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Taylor.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Mr. Osmond, I just wanted to go up a page, if I could, Ms. Syed, and speak about something that's near and dear to me, and that's our police station. It's on the list. We've talked about it ad nauseum, but I guess since we're all together here for a budget meeting, it would be good just to understand one more time, where are we at with this project? Are we still on budget to that revised number of 1.1? What's the latest and greatest on this?
Your Worship, through to Councillor Taylor, at this point, up to January 19th, when I did my last budget review, in terms of the project that we're actually doing the work with now, we're on budget. We're still below budget, and we're nearing completion. We're still waiting for a few items that have been back ordered. The operation, of course, as you know, is in full flight, but there are some minor items that need to be finished, which is already accommodated in the budget. So we're working now within budget, slightly below budget, and there's no concerns at this point with the budget from my perspective.
And Councillor Taylor, I believe Mr. Brennan is going to be bringing a report on February the 8th. Mr. Brennan, is that correct?
That's correct.
Very good. Thank you.
Yes, Your Worship.
Thank you. All right. So can we continue to move along, Madam Treasurer?
Sure, Your Worship. So next up is recreation and events. And this is the capital summary.
Right. I just wanted to ask a question. The other night, there was a comment in the Councillor Post about murals. So you've got an additional $18,000 in there. Councillor Post, are you involved in this? And what's the process for determining what murals will be on the walking track?
Thanks so much, Mr. Mayor. Actually, yes, I've been in talks with Ms. Phillips since our last council meeting where this was discussed. They've already earmarked some of the funds to go forward for the project that we discussed in order to honor the healthcare workers, the frontline workers. So that's going to be coming in the coming months. And then we will also still have some other funds ready to do a call for artists for to complete that project, to add a couple of more murals along the walking track as well. So we're hopeful that we can add a few new walking track murals with the funds that are allocated there, and one of them will be the one that council discussed.
Very good. Thank you.
Your Worship, for clarity, that budget right now is at 12,000. We've had invoices coming on those murals that we have in place right now, so they're all finished. Ones that are done, so we still have 12,000 remaining, as Councillor Post alluded to, and they will be earmarked for projects in 21.
Very good. Thank you. Okay, go ahead, Madam Treasurer.
Okay, so moving on to infrastructure services, we'll start with tax funded portion. So starting with planning.
Madam Treasurer.
I think we missed parks.
We missed parks, Madam Treasurer.
Yeah, I'm going to say.
Oh, we did. Okay, my apologies.
Missed a slight chunk.
Yeah, just bear with me for a second.
I know you were trying to get Mr. Osmond off the hot seat, but I'm afraid not yet.
Okay, so we do have again a couple of pages of project summary for parks. So I will land on the second page.
Okay. I'll ask the first question if you don't mind, councillors. The trail system. Last budget, we approved in the order of $500,000 to continue our work on expanding our trail system. We had 335,000 added for this year. Mr. Osmond, I guess we haven't done any of that work yet. Can you just give us an update on what the delays are? Is it strictly COVID, or is there other issues going on?
Your Worship, the trail work that our tenders are all been prepared for some time, but we've been stopped by CVC because we're crossing a body of water, some wetland and a stream that runs north of Broadway between Blind Line and the existing crossing, if you would, for rail line. And that area in particular is a sensitive area, and they require more detailed study. And we're finishing those studies now. Once that's done, we can do that. But what we've done now is we've gone back and we've cut back the project so that we can start the project, and we're preparing to go out to tender in the next couple of weeks for the phase 1 of that project. So it brings us down to within 300 feet of the crossing, railway crossing on Broadway. And as you know, because of the ORDC plans in 21, that would trigger our next phase of our projects as well, going from Blind Line, if you would, down to Dawson and into Center Street. So that's our plan, to do that, and some other connections in the trail network. That was the whole up as a CVC study, and we've had to do 2 right now. We're on the second one, and we're just ready to complete it. So it has to be done first before we can do the boardwalks.
Very good, thank you, sir. I've got Councillor Andrews and then Councillor Post. Councillor Andrews.
Thank you, Your Worship, and Mr. Osmond, you're on the hot seat right now. I hope you don't mind. Okay. This would be on, I guess, page 116, and this is pertaining to the Boardwalk Dragonfly Park. For those of us who have used that wonderful part of our community, I am aware of the deterioration, but if you could just provide a little bit of explanation behind the necessity. And I was just thinking outside of the box here, if, I know that this is a budget ask, but if community groups might be willing to also step up in some capacity to provide some support to that. But I'll let you provide some insight to that particular project.
Mr. Osmond.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through to Councillor Andrews. First of all, this project has been kicking around for a couple of years. Unfortunately, we put it out to tender 2 years ago, and it came in really high. And so we had to reorganize that particular project. And one of the biggest issues, of course, when you get into wetlands is how you put in the helical piers we're using for going into the wetland itself. The work has to be done primarily in real cold temperatures. So we're stuck to doing it in a particular time to satisfy the CBC piece. And the project itself also replaces a lot of the boardwalk and also the undercarriage, if you would, the substructure that goes into the wetland itself. And so it's quite costly. The question is a good question. I mean, the Dragonfly has been around for quite some time. It's deteriorated to a point where we can't have people walking on it, so we've kind of closed it off. It is a great space within the community. It does get used on a walkway, if you would, that goes into the flag, where the flagpole stands. But the connection around basically the whole perimeter, if you would, of the wetland is a good attraction when it's equipped with a proper boardwalk. And the intent is to complete it this year. It won't complete the whole project, but it will complete probably half or a little bit more of the project. It is costly. So we want to get started on it. We tried to get started on it a couple of years ago, and the intent is to keep it going and do it over a period of time. And until we go to tender, we don't know how far those dollars are going to take us. Depends on what the contractors come back with.
Now, if you mind me asking, was there a thought to looking at other types of materials as opposed to what it has been used, and of course over a period of time it ends up rotting and deteriorating, something maybe a little more permanent and maybe a little more expensive, but could be done in different phases? Is that part of the thought here?
You know, helical piers are metal, and they'll be around for a long time. And they are actually drilled down into the subsurface until it's solid ground. So they could be down quite a distance, and some are quite deep, and that's quite expensive to do that part of it. And the intent is to be able to build this boardwalk without touching the sensitive area. So actually, you drill ahead, and you kind of drill ahead, and you put the boardwalk on top, and you stay off the wetland. So it's got to be done in a very sensitive way, and it creates quite an expense to do that.
Now, is that in consultation? You did mention, if I'm not mistaken, CBC, but that area also has been susceptible to some springtime flooding. And I guess this would take into account a new design that would also alleviate some future problems that could be, dealt with if we end up having some significant spring thaw.
That's correct, Your Worship. That's correct, Councillor Andrews. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
So I can interject here. I was involved in building some of the bridges over at Island Lake in a work crew, and these helical piles that Mr. Osmond was talking about are, I think, very new technology, certainly since the Dragonfly Boardwalk was built. And they drill right in, below the frost line. They're a more permanent solution. I think they're less invasive than the other. And of course, what's happened now is some of those wooden piers that were set in have been heaved by the frost, and you've got a skateboard park in there instead of a boardwalk. So and the other piece on this is when this gets completed, I think we need to do a better job of communicating some of these beautiful assets that we have in town, because I can tell you the majority of people don't know what's there, and I think we need to do a much better job of delivering on these types of trail assets that are in town. I think we need to do a better job of that. So I hope communications is listening. We need to do some more things. Maybe have an event out there. Get some more people out there in the future post COVID. So thank you, Mr. Osmond. I've got Councillor Post and then Councillor Peters. Councillor Post, go ahead.
Thank you very much. My question is also for Mr. Osmond and is also about Dragonfly Park. Now I see in the description for Dragonfly Park that you're speaking about just the west side, but when I'm looking at the budget, I don't see any other allocation of any monies in the upcoming 10 years to do the remainder. Now you did just mention to Councillor Andrews that a portion of that boardwalk is completely unusable. The other portion, once we've done the west side, will the rest of the boardwalk be usable, or what's the plan going forward for that? Are we only doing the one half? Is that all that needs to be done?
Sure.
Your worship, through to Councillor Post, the intent is to do the area that's right now so we can make it passable and start using it. But you're correct. One of our problems with that particular area is that we're not out doing the analysis that needs to be done on the rest of the boardwalk. And once we get the west side done, we'll have an idea of what kind of costing we're seeing in our budgets, and then we will be projecting into the future. And the other thing about I should bring up about that particular park area, Dragonfly becomes a large junction in the future. Dragonfly is a connection when you come across the boundary from Caledon into Orangeville. From a walkway system that hopefully gets developed through the CBC coming up from down south, coming in through the ravine and so on. So there's lots of different ways of looking at it. And Dragonfly becomes a junction, if you would, from there into the crossing over into Island Lake and so on. So that particular area is something that we need to take, you're right, take a better look at and to do a better marketing job with once we get it developed into a safe and usable condition. So you're right, Councillor Post, we have not projected into the future at this point because, quite frankly, it's been difficult to do that. We've had a lot of mixed signals on what it costs to do it, and we need to see what we're doing in that area to see how it works out, and then we will start projecting into the future. You still need some more analysis.
Perfect. I appreciate that clarification. Thank you so much.
Councillor Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, this is a bit of a crossover item, but I think being on parks, it's probably most appropriate to bring it up now. Both the parks budget and the infrastructure services budget have line items or have built-in capacity for tree replacement. But to my knowledge, there's no single line item for the addition of tree canopy. And given that the tree policy we passed last year and the canopy target that we've set, I think we need to start allocating some specific funding towards improving that canopy number because replacement is not going to get us there. So I have some ways I think we can get it there. We can sort of chat about that when we're done the operating piece as well. But I guess I just want to table that at this point that I think we should have a dedicated line item in there for that to hit that goal because it is fairly aggressive and it's obviously a town-wide initiative and a very positive one from a health and community perspective.
Thank you. All right, Councillor Sherwood, please.
Yes, I believe Mr. Osmond wanted to respond. I saw his hand go up.
I just would like to acknowledge the comment from Councillor Peters and agree that while you might have a line item, I didn't want to lose the fact. Lose the focus on all of our projects that are in the outdoors for the most part. As giving an example, if we do Rebecca Hills Park, we will definitely be planting trees in the landscape. We're doing the trail network, we're planting trees in the landscape. If we do the fire station, we're planting trees in the landscape. So pretty much every project we do in the outdoors will have trees associated with it, and they will show up in the budget lines for those particular projects. So we're still doing that. Not that I don't disagree, because I do agree that taking a look at it, and I'm saying to you in another communication that we need to take a closer look at the canopy project or canopy program, and then we apply it in the future so that we get a good idea of where we're planting and the size of tree and the reason and the variety and why we're using that variety. So it's quite interesting, and I think we're still in the early stages, and you're absolutely right. As we go forward in the future years, we probably might want to take a look at a line item for that particular area.
Thank you, Mr. Osmond. Sorry, Councillor Sherwood, go right ahead.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Two items that I'm kind of wanting to get further review on that I'm a little hesitant in supporting, and they're very small ticketed items. One is on page 128, the artificial turf at Murray's Mountain at 30,000, and the other one is in page 129, the community garden shed at 10,000. Are we? So again, I would like if you could speak on those two, Mr. Osmond, are they come across to me as nice to have, but not really needed?
Mr. Osmond.
Your worship, I guess, first of all, I'll take the community garden because it's a changing environment right now. It's something we're taking a close look at in terms of the future of that community garden as well as other community gardens. The existing shed that's at the community garden right now is needs to be replaced, and our intent is not to replace it with a wooden structure, but with a vandal-proof structure, which is basically a poured in place, actually poured concrete that comes in already done. We bring it to site as a complete unit. It gets dropped right on the site, so that's why it costs a little bit more, but it's a unit that'll be there for a long time. It's concrete based. And we've had quite a bit of feedback from the community garden users that they have concerns with the space and being able to have a space large enough to function. And as we design and redesign, if you would, what we're doing in community gardens, that shed will become very important to our future design. The second piece on the artificial turf. Artificial turf has shown up on your plans for the last, before my time. Artificial turf's been on your plans since 2014. It keeps coming up, and we haven't crossed the bridge to take a look at it. In fact, what you need with the artificial turf is a business case for that artificial turf to put it in one or two places. The intent is to look at artificial turf either from an inside business case or an outside business case. The old campus, if you would, around Tony Rose, including the old DSS, Murray's Mountain, the lands around Tony Rose, and the ideal location for a artificial turf surface. One argument would be next to a school is ideal because you get to use you collaborate between your partners, so on and so forth. So the question on what you do with artificial turf needs to be addressed. It came up in 2014-15 in your facility and parks plan and strategy, and now it's coming up again in the Parks Master Plan, Parks Recreation Master Plan. And what we're doing is putting it on the table to address it and see exactly what the business case. Everybody knows what artificial turf does. I mean, the easy thing to say to you is it gives you longevity of the season. It gives you longer seasons. If we had that artificial turf this year, we'd be playing right through the winter because we've had very little snow. So they're very, flexible environments. They're also great revenue generators. But from a business perspective, we want to make sure it's sustainable, and we should address it because it keeps coming up, and we haven't answered the question: what do we do with this?
So is it just for a consultant then, Mr. Osmond?
Yes, absolutely. It's for a consultant to do the actual business case for it. Take a look at all the different things you do with that particular facility. How can you fund it? And will it be sustainable operationally? Will it generate revenue to help sustain it in the future? And it answers all those questions.
Okay. I think I'm in support of this myself. We've got the Soccer Association, which is growing. 2026, the World Cup of Soccer is coming to Canada, United States and Mexico. Soccer is going to become a hot topic, and I know our demographic is changing, and that soccer is one of the sports that is very popular. Lacrosse season is going to be extended. There's some football teams that are playing, and all of them will be able to use an artificial turf field. I've also had conversations with the track and field coach at ODSS. He would like to see a rubberized track, maybe incorporated into upgrades to that field. And I think we can probably get some fundraising going with the user groups, maybe some service clubs. And I think the consultant will pull all this together and put it in front of council to see if we want to move forward. So I'm personally, I'd like to see an artificial turf field in our town. Anyway, thank you, Mr. Osmond. Any further questions from councillors at this moment? Okay, let's move ahead, Madam Treasurer.
Thank you, Worship.
I'm sorry?
If I may, I was actually in your queue. Yeah, apologize, I was in your queue. I just wanted to catch up on a few things. It's hard to interject as the conversation goes. Just really quickly, I've been through Dragonfly Park in my COVID walks, and that park is an absolute need, and it's a shame if you know the history behind that park and why it's called what it is, and we won't dive into it here, but it's important that we keep our history and keep up with projects that have been done in yesteryear and keep it well today. So I'd certainly be in favor of that. I've been over to the gardens with my friend Sylvia Bradley and been through that garden shed. It's in disarray, it's in disrepair. It certainly would be in favor of replacing that as well. And, you know, Your Worship, I'm with you on this artificial turf thing. You know, my son's in high school, and, you know, it's unfortunate, but both those fields at ODSS, we've got a beautiful football field there that, you know, candidly, I don't think we're doing our youth a service with the field looking the way it is, and it's difficult to keep it up. And I mean, no offense, Mr. Osmond, to your staff, if you're thinking about how we keep it up, but it's just really hard to keep a field like that in the conditions that we are and the environment that we have here in Orangeville. And over at ODSS, it's the same thing. It would be great to have a state-of-the-art facility that we could use on a regular basis. And Mr. Osmond is spot on with the idea of extending that field. Like, God, you could get out there with a snowblower and clean it off and be able to use it on a more regular basis. So, you know, I guess I have high aspirations for our little town, and I don't think that's a whole bunch of money to be able to invest in to see if this is something that we could do and make something great. Whereas right now, it's honestly, it's just not up to the par that our town can be, in my mind. So I thank you, Mr. Osmond, for bringing those things forward. I think they're all great ideation. Thank you, Your Worship.
If you could, Your Worship, just for clarity, one of the things that we want to address in this study is to talk to the school board about ODSS. ODSS is not maintained by the town. It's actually maintained by the school, and we basically don't use that facility that much. It's been used by some groups, of course. They do rent from the school, but that old campus area, ideally, those lands are great lands to develop a artificial turf surface. Yes, we have other lands that may suit the same purpose, but you're absolutely correct. It's next to a school. It's got all kinds of good positives, but that's the intent, is to take a look at that old campus and see how it all works and what's the best way forward. And the business piece is critical to not just building the thing, but operating it. So that's pretty important to us.
And Mr. Osmond, if I remember, you did mention indoor or outdoor. So, you know, we're thinking about Tony Rose. You know, could B have AstroTurf down, for instance, and be a venue for indoor lacrosse, indoor soccer, indoor football, indoor baseball? I think we need to look at that building as well. For an indoor grass surface. So, very good. Any further questions on Parks and Rec, councillors?
Your Worship, if I may, I just wanted to interject on your comment there. I think that's absolutely spot on. We're in an environment where our youth are inside, and right now it's a struggle with COVID. And I know we're going to come out of this; it's going to be a different world. But we should be finding more things for our youth to do. And what you just said, Your Worship, is absolutely right. So I believe that pursuing something like that over the near term is something that this town that's snow infested should be doing. I think it's a great idea.
Thank you. Yeah, well, Mr. Osmond is on the ball, and I think we need to you know, go through that exercise. And these things are not inexpensive. I think they're several hundreds of thousands of dollars, and so it's going to be you know, something to fit into a future budget. But we'd like to see it you know, unveiled before us, and the sooner the better. And I'm hoping, you know, with a number of user groups getting behind the project and the Upper Grand District School Board being involved as well, that we can make it happen sooner than later. So let's hope so. Again, councillors, Deputy Mayor McIntosh, I don't see you on the screen. Do you have any questions, sir?
No, that's
okay.
I have none.
All right. So I think we're okay on parks now, Madam Treasurer, if we can move on. Thank you.
Thank you, Worship. So we're moving on to infrastructure services. I do not believe there's any project for 2021 for planning, so I will move to public works. And just bear with me. Again, there are multiple pages under public works, Your Worship. So I'm just going to land on the last page, and then depending on council question, I can scroll up and down.
I have one. I'd like to ask either Mr. Lackey or Mr. Jones. We've got Survey Lane rehab. I drove down Survey Lane recently. I'm just wondering, is this road necessary, or is it something that we could decommission and turn over to the adjacent property owners or sell to the adjacent property owners? You've got townhouses on both sides of that lane, and I'm just wondering what the function of that lane is. It doesn't seem to really serve anybody other than a through road, which isn't necessary. So Mr. Jones or Mr. Lackey, I wonder if you could comment on that.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll take the first crack at it. First of all, Survey Lane was identified in our roads needs study as being in need of rehabilitation, which is why we have carried it in the budget. Staff didn't consider the possibility of decommissioning the laneway. There are times where laneways can't, of course, be decommissioned. They're providing access to garages and driveways in the rears of properties and so forth. But sometimes as well, laneways carry infrastructure along with it, whether they be town infrastructure, utility infrastructure, which make it inadvisable to turn them over to the private property owners. I haven't looked into this. This wasn't something that was on our radar in terms of perhaps selling the lane off. I will ask Mr. Lackey, perhaps he's familiar with whether there's utilities underneath Survey Lane that would preclude us from looking into selling it to the adjacent landowners.
Mr. Lackey.
Thank you, Your Worship. Mr. Jones is correct. We haven't considered the decommissioning of it. However, we do have infrastructure down that laneway. So that would need to be considered if we were to go any further with a decommissioning idea.
I guess a further question would be, Mr. Lackey, if, you know, we're talking about paving it now at a cost of $71,000, and if it continues to be a roadway, there'll be additional maintenance in the future. If it was decommissioned and grass was put there and it was just an easement that Public Works had access to, would that not stop the maintenance costs going forward? And is it necessary for it to be a road?
That's a possibility, Your Worship. It could become an easement, but we would certainly need to continue to have access to deal with the infrastructure.
Right. Well, I'm just going to throw this out there. I wonder if we could maybe pull that and put it towards 2022 rather than now, and get some answers on whether it's even needed. I mean, maybe it is. I drove through it and I don't see the need for an access there at all to any of the adjacent property owners. And,
can I just add something to your comment about driving through? I too drove through there, and there isn't a single driveway or back entrance into a property required along that laneway. So I think it would be a perfect opportunity to just put grass there.
Mm-hmm. Well,
I'm sorry.
I think we need to ask staff to really dig into this a little bit deeper. But when I see that maintenance cost, and of course, if it continues to be a roadway, it's going to deteriorate, and then we'll be facing this in another 15 or 20 years, the same cost, and of course, more at that time. So I don't know. I just wanted to ask that question of staff, and I would prefer to defer this till next budget in light of staff digging into this and seeing whether there's a reason to continue the roadway at all. Anyway,
I tend to agree with you, Your Worship. After my observations today, like I said, there isn't a single driveway or garage that people need access in that lane.
Okay, in my queue, I've got Deputy Mayor McIntosh up next, and councillors, if you'd like to weigh in, let me know. Deputy Mayor, go right ahead.
Thank you, Worship. You took my question away from me.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. Just a suggestion, if we still need the easement, could we not just block that road off and we still maintain, like, we don't have to maintain it, but we'd still have access to that road instead of selling it off if we still need the easement part of it. But just a suggestion. I certainly don't see spending $71,000 to repave it. I've also driven there and there's nothing there. It just goes nowhere. So just my thoughts.
If we spend some money to remove the asphalt and put grass there, you know, the backyards of Lavender Lane back onto that, it would give a place for children to play. And if the public works trucks need to drive onto the grass to service utilities, they have access. So anyway, well, let's move along. Mr. Taylor, go right ahead.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I have 3 questions for Mr. Jones. One is, I'm hoping I can ask the usual question. We're in budget, so I imagine citizens will just want to completely understand this. There's a, I don't know if you can hear Mr. Jones, but there's a loud or maybe a dull roar of applause going on as they see the Hanson Street Bridge there. Could you just lay out the dates and the plans and how the funding works one more time? I would appreciate that. And then number 2 and number 3 for me is, we had made arrangements through the budget process to put some public work projects in this document. And for the life of me, I just don't see Spencer with the lights and I don't see Faulkner with the sidewalk. And if I'm missing them, I apologize, but I don't see them in here. I'm just curious, is this just document 1 or are they hidden in a spot I just can't see?
Mr. Jones.
Through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Taylor, with respect to the Hanson Boulevard Bridge over Lower Lenora Creek, the design has been proceeding over the last several months, and I believe that we are approaching approvals from the Conservation Authority for that. Our intent is to go to tender and have that bridge constructed in 2021. The connection of the road, of course, won't be complete until the piece of road between the bridge and where Hanson Boulevard currently ends just west of Blind Line is completed. That will be constructed as part of the Edgewood Valley 2B subdivision. My understanding is that the discussions between the town and the developer are nearing completion, and planning staff plan to bring a report forward for council's consideration either on the 22nd of December or on the 8th of March to draft approve that. At that point, the developer will begin to submit detailed engineering plans for this. I would not expect that they would be in a position to construct the road in 2021. It is more likely that they will be constructing the road in 2022, which actually works well with our construction process. We wouldn't want our construction crews building the bridge at the same time that the construction crews for the developer were nearby. So in all likelihood, we're talking about a connection happening at some point in 2022. With respect to your next questions as it related to several of the other projects in here, you mentioned the signals. I believe you're referring to the signals at Riddell and Alder and Riddell and Spencer. And those traffic signals, of course, were the subject of some discussion at a budget meeting last week. At a council meeting last week, and there simply hasn't been time for them to appear in the budget. My recollection is that there was a motion to fund those signals from reserves, so they wouldn't impact the $2.6 million tax dollar allocation to capital, but would be funded out of reserves. With respect to the Faulkner Street sidewalks, that went to council on December the 14th, and council looked at 3 options. And there seemed to be a general preference for the 3rd option, which would have been a sidewalk that followed Faulkner Street and along Northgate to tie into the walkway that cuts through to Breeden Parkway for $166,000. Again, that's not currently shown here. That was referred to the budget deliberation. So it is something for council to consider as part of these deliberations. Now, I will go back to earlier in the presentation and comments from our treasurer. Council has directed staff to include $2.6 million in tax dollar capital annually as part of our budget. And if council were to go beyond that 2.6 million, it could choose to increase the overall commitment to the capital budget or to fund it out of reserves. Similarly, if council is looking at removing items from the budget, by decreasing the allocation below the 2.6 million, of course, that would require a tax increase in future years to bring us back up to our current level of capital investment.
That's great.
Okay.
Thank you. Your worship, if I may, do we need to do something with that for Faulkner then to ensure that it's captured here?
Well, I don't recall that we voted on that positively to make that happen, spend 166,000. That's not my recollection.
No, it was to be part of the discussions in this budget. That's all we voted on. So I agree with you. It's just, it's not here. I just want to make sure that we have the discussion.
Well,
to me, in a recent meeting, we voted to include that item in the discussions for the budget. We didn't. It's a clear delineation. We didn't agree to pass it. We just agreed to discuss it.
So, Councillor Taylor, if I can remember looking at some of the drawings and what have you, I don't believe there's been a proper public engagement with the residents on Sunset or up there. You know, this was going to chop off something like 15 feet off of their front lawns, and I think it's premature to be looking at this without having a meeting with the public who are involved in this. So I think we should put this aside. I think we should give it to town staff to have those meetings with the residents and get their support. I don't believe, Mr. Jones, am I correct that there's been no engagement of the residents there on this idea?
Your worship, you are correct. There was a petition that was brought forward by the one property owner requesting the sidewalk around the curve for that first part of Faulkner Street. We do have a sidewalk policy that does indicate that it is the town's policy to have a sidewalk on one side of all local streets. But that policy does go further and indicate that for those roads like Faulkner and Northgate and so forth, where there is not currently a sidewalk, that one would be constructed at the time when the road was reconstructed. However, it wasn't something that would necessarily be included, that there would need to be public consultation. The policy goes on to state that were a sidewalk to be considered outside of a road reconstruction, that there would need to be public consultation so that all of the affected landowners would have an opportunity to express their opinions, and that information would be brought back to council to allow them to decide ultimately whether to proceed with a project or not.
Your worship, if I may. Yes, thank you, your worship. To be clear, to the people that live in that area, I am not the main protagonist advocating to have this happen. I simply want to follow through on what I think council said that we would do, and maybe I defer to Madam Clerk and ask the question of what did we decide a couple of meetings ago, because my impression was we all agreed that we would have that as part of these budget discussions. And I guess I'm just looking for direction. I don't want to lose the point.
Madam Clerk. Well, I don't think we want to lose the point either, Councillor Taylor, but I don't think we're ready to make the decision yet without engaging the public. So my strong recommendation to you would be we should put it aside, but direct town staff to have those public meetings and bring the report back to council.
Yeah, your worship, thank you. I think that's most likely what's going to happen, but nonetheless, we passed a motion. You know.
Well, Madam Clerk, put you on the hot seat. Could you read what we agreed to?
Mr. Mayor, I could pull it up, but I do recall, based on what Councillor Taylor is saying, is that it was to be discussed at budget. So it's in council's hands in terms of what they want to do with it at this point. If council wishes to obtain further information from staff with respect to this particular issue, my suggestion would be that there be a motion put on the floor to indicate that staff prepare a report with respect to it.
Okay. Councillor Taylor, do you wish to make a motion?
I would, Your Worship, and if I may ask one more question for our municipal friends here with knowledge, would we still not, even if we did that, would we not have to put a monetary value into the budget to potentially support such action?
Your Worship, may I interject for a moment?
Madam Treasurer, go right ahead.
Okay, so through you to Councillor Taylor, I think, and more to Mr. Jones's point about, we do have a funding envelope for a capital budget, which is 2.6, and this is council directed. And this is the envelope that we've been carrying on and maintaining since 2019 and for the foreseeable future. So any inclusion or increase or reduction to that envelope is clearly at council's discretion. But saying that, even after a budget deliberation and approval, if council wishes to add projects or specific amount, that can be mitigated and financed through reserve. My understanding would be this particular project would have been financed through our capital reserves to begin with. So Councillor Taylor, I just offered this as a suggestion or sort of another point for you to consider. What I'm hearing from Mr. Jones and also through his worship, that this will require some public consultation. So given that public consultation requires time, and obviously staff report requires time, so for the budget purpose, I think we can move forward, given that this has no implication on taxes per se. I hope, and again, I offered that as a point to consider for you, Councillor Taylor.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Syed. Your Worship, may I go ahead, if I may?
Sure.
Yeah, I would like to defer to the rest of council. I certainly voted in favor of exploring it, and it wouldn't have passed unless at least 3 others did the same. So it sounds like, you know, I don't want to put words in your mouth, Your Worship, but you might have voted no. I can't recall. But
I think I'm interested in hearing more about it, but I can't see there being a decision here without the residents who are going to be directly affected. I mean, this is seriously going to chop off a big chunk of their front lawn. So I'd like to hear what they have to say about this, because that subdivision has not changed in 60 years, and I find it curious that this is a need at this moment.
Again, I'm not advocating to change it either. I want to make sure we're not going to lose a point. So if I may, I'd like to defer to one of the other councillors who also voted in favor of that to see what they'd like to have happen.
Deputy Mayor McIntosh, go right ahead.
Thank you, Worship. I agree with Councillor Taylor. That motion was passed and I did support it. However, listening tonight, I don't think this is the place to discuss it. I think it needs to be put over till we get a staff report. And as our treasurer said, at that time, if we decide to go ahead with it, we can either decide to hold it off till the following budget year or take it out of reserves right away. That's what I can see happening. I don't think tonight's the place to stick it on the budget unless we're going to cut something, and I don't see that happening for that amount.
Any other councillors wish to weigh in here?
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, please.
Councillor Coast.
Thank you very much. I'm in support of what my fellow councillors have said. I also voted in favor of having this discussed at budget time. And I think what Councillor Taylor is trying to say, and I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I think what we don't want to see happen is something similar to the McCannell Guide Rail project, where because it wasn't included in the budget, it just got pushed away because it wasn't included in the budget. So I take that point, and I agree that I think we have to have public consultation done. I just want to ensure that if we decide to move forward, it's not going to be voted down simply because it wasn't included in our talks today, if that makes sense. So I'm happy to move a motion forward to get a staff report or to move on to the next steps of public consultation. But I do want to ensure that if it is a project we decide to move ahead with, that the money is there to do so and that it won't be voted down as a result of it not being discussed today.
Councillor Post, Madam Treasurer gave us the path, which is pull the money from reserves if council so desires in the near future.
Yeah, absolutely.
So again, I would suggest that, you know, following on what Deputy Mayor said, I don't see apportioning the money at this moment. If residents and if the staff report comes back again in support of the sidewalk going the full distance, then council will have the opportunity to vote and pull the money from reserves at that time. So I think we should probably have a motion to direct staff to carry forward with the public engagement and come back to council with a report.
Mr. Mayor, I'm happy to move that forward.
Okay, Councillor Post.
Your Worship, may I make another query? If
Go ahead, Councillor Taylor.
Through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Sherwood, I was just wondering what your thoughts were on this. I know it's important to you to have everything in the budget, and how would you act moving forward, and what's your wishes?
Councillor Sherwood.
Yes, Your Worship, I do recall that I did support that this be discussed during budget period. And yes, you know that I'm very much, it must be in the budget unless I'll approve it. But if it comes back that it's a safety issue or whatever, I'm going to approve it. You know, and that seemed to be what the petition of the residents seemed to say. I heard Madam Treasurer, and she said we could take it out of reserve. So I think we need to go forward with what's being recommended to us tonight, and let's get a report and see where it brings us from there.
So Councillor Post is making the motion. Councillor Taylor, are you seconding it, or do you wish to speak further?
No, I wish to second it. Thank you, Your Worship.
Okay. Any further comments from any councillors on this matter before we vote? Councillor Peters.
Thank you. Through you to the rest of the council, I kind of see the argument going the other way with the reserves piece. If it's allocated, then that's a safer approach, and if we don't end up spending it, then it doesn't come out. But when we're talking about the levy and what gets charged and what the overall budget is, if this is coming out of reserves, potentially we should be accounting for what's going into reserves. And so I still think there needs to be some amounts in there, whether that's the full amount or not. I know the shortest piece of sidewalk, which was not the direction of council at the time, wouldn't require the public consultation because it's a single property owner, to my knowledge, maybe two. But obviously the full extent, I want to see the public consultation happen, but I'd rather have it on the books and not have it come to fruition and know that our reserves are safe and healthy and accounted for than come back with the answer later on.
Councillor Peters, do you wish to increase the tax levy by 0.5%?
I think it should be discussed, and when we conclude these discussions, whether that's tomorrow or next week, having that line item in there is part of a more fulsome discussion, I believe.
Your Worship, if I may interject one more time.
All right, go ahead, Treasurer.
Yeah, Your Worship, through you to Councillor Peters. My understanding is the project is somewhere between, and Mr. Jones can correct me, it's somewhere between 150 to 166,000 or somewhere along that line. And again, these are, and again, when I say this, I'm speaking relatively here. These are fairly small amounts, and the point that I was making earlier to Councillor Taylor is that we have anywhere from $65 to $70 million budget that we are deliberating. There will be events throughout the year where you will come across projects that requires further vetting, further consultation, and that's why we have reserves built in place, may that be capital reserves or any other sources of reserves. So the point I'm making is that given the amount before us, it can easily be mitigated post-budgetary process as long as councillors come to an agreement tonight.
Right. Thank you, Madam Treasurer. So we have a motion on the floor here. Councillor,
can I just add one more?
Yes, Councillor Sherwood.
Sorry, was Councillor Andrews ahead of me?
I just wanted to pipe in. I guess either I'm not on the screen or it just happens to be the sequence of way Teams is showing all of us. Thank you, Councillor Sherwood. Your Worship, I think that, you know, in supporting Councillor Post's point, I do feel that it's important that we move ahead with staff report. And the treasurer has been very clear about the option here. I just was looking for some clarity from Mr. Jones because I was going through my files very quickly trying to recall what the dollar amount was to Councillor Peters' point on what the one that didn't require public consultation. But I feel that the opportunity to look at the option that the Madam Treasurer has presented is probably, in my opinion, the best route at this time.
Thank you. Councillor Sherwood, do you have something further to say, or just pointing out that Councillor?
No, I wanted to ask clarification. So say for example, we removed the survey lane rehab. We discussed that, you know, we want to kind of learn more about that. That frees up 71,500.
Right.
Right. So that could be applied towards. So it would go back sitting in our reserves.
Yes, it would.
So, do you know where I'm heading there? That in other words, when the treasurer, so if we come back and we say, well, we want 166 to do this project, we've already just freed up 71,500, have we not?
Good point. So, Councillor, I'm wondering if we can vote on the motion on the floor, keep Councillor Sherwood's comment there regarding Survey Lane in our back pocket for the end of the evening, and let's continue the discussion. But I'd like to call a vote here on this motion, and that was basically to direct town staff to come back with a report to council regarding the extended sidewalk through the Sunset Drive subdivision, including the home on Faulkner near ODSS, and to engage the community and the residents in that report. All in favor?
Yes.
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 Any opposed? No. Okay, so let's continue on, councillors, if we can, and finish the balance of infrastructure services and public works discussions. Were there any further questions that councillors had? Councillor Peters, is your hand up, sir?
Yes, thank you. Just a general question, I guess, so we sort of understand where we're all headed. I was under the impression that we'd sort of be putting capital and operating together once we've gone through them both in terms of approval. Did you see us approving capital separately, or waiting until we had both in front of us to look at in combination?
I would like to see us approve capital tonight if we can. I mean, I don't see any hurdles here to that end, but if you have other
I just wondered if council wanted to see the impacts of both before approving both.
Your Worship, if I may.
Yeah.
So as I was presenting earlier tonight, I go back to the $2.6 million frozen envelope for capital budget. So this has been since we've maintained that envelope for taxation from 2019. So through you to Councillor Peters, that essentially means that year over year, there is no further implication or tax levy asked, because we're literally carrying the same tax levy requirement year over year without any further increase. So coming out of tonight's budget or tonight's presentation, there won't be any further impact to taxation.
Sorry, could you remind me about that motion and exactly what it entailed and why it was put in place?
So in 2000, okay, sorry about that, Councillor Peters. So through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Peters, in 2019, I did bring a report, which is part of my annual report that I bring to council before a budgetary process, and I've kind of explained that when I was tabling that that's one of the steps we go through in the planning stages. And that particular report was seeking council direction for contribution into capital, incremental contribution. And at that time, the entire council voted that the contribution into capital budget would remain status quo at 2.6 million for the next foreseeable 10 years. So this year is year 3 of that 10 years. As such, unless council change that direction. As such, year-over-year impact from capital budget is nothing, to put it very simply.
So if I could follow up just for a moment, contributions to reserves would fall under operating then?
Contribution to reserves, exactly.
Okay, so that, I mean, it's not a direct relationship to the capital budget, but since we are talking about pulling from reserves, that the amount of ask on the capital side, from a levy perspective, may be fixed, but from the operating side may not.
May not. And tomorrow we will have an opportunity to look at the presentation. Now tonight, I'm not going over our debt level as well as our reserves level, but tomorrow night, one of the things that I will present to you is our long-term financial outlook. I did lay that out in the document itself. It's toward the end of the document. Yes. And if you look at our 10-year, and I'm specifically speaking to reserves here, if you look at our 10-year horizon or 10-year outlook, you will see that we are very much in a healthy state. We are very much optimal in terms of our reserve levels as well as our debt level. Now, mind you, these are 10-year projection, and the outer years numbers will change as we go through different iteration of our asset management plan, the next iteration of our development charter studies, water wastewater studies. But as we stand right now, looking at the horizon 10-year out, we are at a very optimal level of our reserves as far as we're concerned.
So we're discussing public works. We've had a few discussions. Is there any further questions from councillors regarding public works items on the capital budget?
Your Worship, if I may ask for a moment to upload the document again. Thank you.
Yes, go right ahead, Madam Treasurer. Thank you.
Okay. Your Worship, can you see the document now?
Yes.
Okay. So we are off to transportation because there is no project for Central.
I just wanted to ask councillors. I know Councillor Sherwood and I had spoken about Survey Lane. Do we want to put that off until a further report from staff on the issue of turning it into an easement rather than a roadway? Is that Councillor Andrews?
Yeah, I got a very quick question for Mr. Jones, if I can, Your Worship, and this is just regarding that if that is decommissioned, there would be some costs involved. They would be minimal, but there would still be costs involved, such as putting grass and maybe covering it up, and so if I can get some clarification on that, that would be really helpful. Thank you.
If we were going to decommission Mr. Jones or Mr. Lackey, would that involve removing the asphalt and gravel and putting soil back and seeding it?
Through you, Your Worship, it would. Certainly, as we've noted, this isn't a project that staff had identified, so we can't come up with any numbers off the cuff for you, as it were. But certainly, if indeed we get to a point where we are going to decommission that, ultimately stop up and close it, as right now it is part of the public highway. So there'd be a legal aspect to that, and then look at what further steps we would have. There would be costs associated with it. What I would suggest is that this could be a subject of a council report in the future, where we could come back to council, identify what some of the options are and what some of the costs are at that time.
Thank you. So, would you recommend leaving the ask in the budget, Mr. Jones, or?
Your Worship, really, that is a council decision.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Peters, go ahead, sir.
I'm happy to support its removal, and in terms of costs that may be incurred later on, be it through a pathway or a landscaping initiative. I think we could come up with those funds later on. And we don't know when the study will be done or when the work would be done. So this might even be a 22 project by the time it happens.
So Councillor Sherwood did make, I think, a good recommendation, is that if we left that money in, it could be put towards the Faulkner/Sunset project. Is that the wish of council, to leave it in, but maybe put it into reserves in the event that the Faulkner project goes forward?
Your Worship?
Yeah, go ahead, sir.
Yeah, to me, this is a fairly simple process. We've got a set amount put aside for capital. We need to approve that set amount for capital. Right. Leave it in. We don't have to go ahead with it. Anything that we don't go ahead with goes into reserves. Yeah. And if we find out we need a bit later, we take it out of reserves. But we just need to approve the set amount of capital budget. If we take it away, it's going to alter everything. I think we need to leave it in, leave the capital budget as is, and go from there. If we don't use it, we don't use it. It goes into reserves.
Okay, so the only direction then would be to ask town staff to produce a report on Survey Lane for council's consideration somewhere in 2021. Councillor Peters, go ahead.
Thank you. Through you to the Deputy Mayor, I think there's a little more to do here, and I think we should be as specific as possible about the projects that we want to complete in 2021. And, based on Councillor Sherwood's comments and some of the other comments from council. If this is going to be deferred one way or another in 2021, I don't think that line item should be there. And then, you know, obviously the math with the reserves works itself into the operating discussion.
So you're suggesting that we put less in the capital budget this year?
I'm not suggesting that that number would change, but if this particular project came from levy, then some other project could reallocate its levy and reserve balance to maintain the 2.6 that the treasurer was speaking of earlier. I just think we should be specific about whether we want this project to happen in 2021, and if we do, leave it there, and if we don't, take it out.
Right. Mr. Brennan, you wish to speak?
Your worship, I think the treasurer's wanting to speak. I just say it's one way or the other. It's at the end of the day, I think you're talking about the same dollar signs. I would encourage council, though, if you do not want us to move forward with it, is just to put a motion on the table. Whether you leave the money in there or not, just put a motion on the table for us not to move forward with the construction, but to come back with a report with options.
Right. So I'd like to put that motion on the floor. Do I have a seconder for that?
Yes.
Councillor Andrews. Any further discussion on that motion? All in favor?
Yes.
Yes. Any opposed? Hearing none. We're directing with that motion staff to hold on the spend on Survey Lane, but to come back with a further detailed report on the possibility of an easement versus the roadway and what are the various options for council to consider. Okay. So
I have another question, Your Worship.
Okay, Councillor Sherwood, go ahead.
So just Monday night, I passed two motions that were to come in the capital budget. One being $25,000 for the 40-kilometer speed signs, and the other was $87,000 for the Riddell Spencer Alder Street light changes. I understand from the treasurer that her budget had to be submitted to clerks long before Mondays. So how are those two extra expenses going to show up and affect the capital budget here if they're not included in this document before us? Because that's what, 112,000.
Madam Treasurer.
Yes, thank you, Worship. So through your Worship to Councillor Sherwood, you are correct. We were working against a tight deadline. In a situation like this, the budget document can still go ahead. My understanding is these are funded through reserves anyway. So I go with my previous explanation. One thing council also needs to understand that once we go through the budget approval process, there are certain sections of the documents that will be updated along with the CAO's message and the mayor's message. And the final document, we will make sure that all these projects that are one-off, that wasn't captured in this particular version of the document, will be captured in the future version. That being said, my understanding would be the project that Councillor Sherwood is talking about were to be funded through reserves. So in this particular case, the approval of the overall budget envelope could still go ahead, and we can add these updated projects in the final version of our document. Councillor Sherwood, hopefully I have answered your question adequately here.
Yes, you had. I guess my thought was if we hadn't have approved the survey lane, that 71,000 would have freed up for one of those projects to, instead of come out of reserves, could have come out of the capital budget. That's where my thought process was going.
Yeah. And I go ahead.
No, you go ahead and finish up there, Madam Treasurer.
So just as a concluding remark, Your Worship, and this is more a general remark, it's not directed to any of the councillors or any of the conversation we have been having. So in terms of just how reserves work, so when we earmark a project and whether part of it is funded through reserves or the entire project is funded through reserve, council still has the ability, even post-budget, to go back and look into it. Reserve contribution or reserve drawing down can be done outside of a budgetary process if council agrees to it. It is different than taxation because you cannot tax people multiple times during the year, but you do have the ability to go back and look at your reserves, and if there are projects that are outside of the regular budgetary discussion or deliberation, whether these projects are due to emergency or for any other reason, that's why reserve or reserve funds are there in place, so that we don't have to open our books for taxation throughout the year. We can always go back to our reserves and look at the level of them and see whether the projects in front of us outside of a budget deliberation, whether we can fund these projects through reserve or reserve funds. So I just wanted to offer that that almost like as a solution to council, as council is deliberating 2021 budget. Thank you, Worship.
Very good. So I think we've expended our energy on public works now, and we can move on to the transit discussion. Madam Treasurer.
Thank you, Your Worship. I don't think there's too many projects under transit.
Great. The transfer station project is the one that's on here. That being funded 73% by provincial and federal grants and 27% by municipal funds. Anybody wish to speak to this item? Councillor Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This one is, I guess, more food for thought, perhaps a bit of a wild concept, but I want to throw it out there. Part of the low floor buses and route discussion, as I understand it from Mr. Jones, is to cover an electronic payment system. And I guess we wouldn't have to decide tonight, but I wonder if the long-term goal of the transit system, as many municipalities are considering, would be to maintain a payless form of transit. If we eventually made transit free in town, would the investment in electronic payment systems, essentially, would we not get the value from them if that was a decision we could see making in the next 5 to 8 years as a town? So I just, it's my understanding that component of the 1.2 million is about 150,000. So not insignificant and a very large discussion, but it's something that crossed my mind during the budget process that I wanted to discuss with council.
Right. I know that what you just brought up, Councillor Peters, free transit, we've had that going now for 9 months or so, I believe. I know that the gas tax money that we receive from the province is calculated partially on our population and partially on ridership. So if we can make our transit system more efficient, which is what the purpose of the transit hub is, and adding the fourth route, ideally our ridership should increase, and that would result in additional funds coming in through gas tax. I think, Madam Treasurer, can you identify the amount of money for us that's going into transit operationally? I think it's in the $300,000 a year range. Is that correct?
I believe so, Your Worship. Just give me a moment. So when you say operationally, on the operating side of things?
Yeah. So there we are, proposed 293. Is that right?
That's correct.
293,000, yeah. So it would be an interesting study to see what would happen. And again, I don't know the exact calculation of the provincial gas tax monies, but it would be interesting to see how that would be impacted with increased ridership going forward. I don't know. Is there an appetite at this moment to go to free transit, Councillor Peters? That's the question, I guess.
Right, and I know we haven't had a full discussion on it, and budget's maybe not the time to do that, but I would hate to invest 150,000 in a system that didn't see its full operating life if the potential, if that direction was being considered. You know, it's that money is half a year's worth of the transit costs to us at the moment, and certainly, like you said, getting ridership up through, you know, 4 routes and a hub and this kind of thing is important. And while the cost to the user is not necessarily the barrier, certainly the system is more efficient from a time and administration perspective if a fee is removed, and more municipalities in North America and Europe have started to look into or adopt a model where transit has no fare.
Right. Okay. I'm just wondering if I could ask Mr. Jones or Mr. Lackey, the $150,000, is that just the retrofit, the hardware cost of retrofitting 6 buses? Is that where we get that number from?
Your Worship, I'll defer that question to Mr. Lackey, if I could, please.
Mr. Lackey.
Thank you. Yes, to your Worship, that is correct. It's for hardware and software to manipulate 6 buses.
Okay. I'm wondering what the rest of council is thinking about this. Is this something that we should defer and maybe have a report back to council in 2021, you know, of the ramifications of free transit in Orangeville and what the cost will be going forward? Deputy Mayor, I see your hand up.
Yes, Your Worship. I think it's a great idea. However, I think it should stay in the budget, and we should also get a report. And before we spend that money, see what we're going to get back from the government for not charging, and actually see what the true cost is going to be. Again, I would prefer to leave it in the budget and just not spend it. If we don't spend it, it can go into reserves when the time comes. But, you know, if we find out we do need it when we've taken it out, that means we got to add it to next year's budget.
Right. So,
yeah.
Would you like to make a motion, Councillor Peters, maybe to direct staff to bring a report sometime in 2021 about what the implications of free transit would be in our town?
Certainly, yeah. And to the Deputy Mayor's comment, this was not to necessarily eliminate the spend, but rather to hold off if that spend was not going to give good value to the town in the long term.
Can I ask Mr. Jones and Mr. Lackey, you know, we've had some discussions about consultation. Is this type of report something that has to go out for review, or is it something we can look at internally?
Your Worship, I think that probably this is something that we could review internally and provide information back to council. I also wanted to point out that the electronic fare collection system was one of the items that was identified in our ICIP transit grant. So of the costs associated with that, 73% would be borne by the federal and provincial government, and the town would only be responsible for 27% of the estimated amount.
Right. Okay, but I think Councillor Peters' point is if there is a time in the near future that we might shift into a free transit system permanently, that's wasted money regardless. There's only one taxpayer here, right? So, you made a motion then to that effect?
Certainly, yes, please.
Okay, do we have a seconder, Deputy Mayor McIntosh? Councillors, anybody want to weigh in on this point before we vote on this? Seeing none, all in favor of Councillor Peters' motion?
Yes.
Yes.
Opposed? Okay, so we're leaving that in the budget, but holding on the spend until we have a report back from staff. Thank you. All right, I think, is that it on transit, folks? Do you have any further questions, Councillor Sherwood? Go ahead.
Yes, Madam Treasurer, could you go to page 175, please? And perhaps I could have Mr. Jones or Mr. Lackey explain to me when it says the transit transfer station, $170,000, but I'm totally confused. What transfer station are we talking about for $170,000?
There's two items there totaling 1.435, it looks like.
What? So, but 170,000 for a transit transfer station, but we haven't even got to that point yet where we've got quotes how much it would be. And, you know, the road alone was going to be over 300,000. We haven't got to that point. So I'm just trying to understand what's this 170,000 for transit transfer station to take I'm reading it is that you take the existing little cubicle that's sitting at 4th Street and we move it to wherever we decide to put the transfer station?
Mr. Lackey or Mr. Jones?
Your worship, this is for the construction of a transit transfer point that we discussed last week at the Edelbrock Center. And the total amount for the project is not 170, but it's about 350. So I'm not sure what that number is there, but when you go back to the summary sheet on page 173, you can see that the allowance in 2021 is $359,000.
Right, and then there's...
Is that for the road then? That's just for the road, not for the actual station.
It's all one and the same. It's a through road as well as a station. Now, keep in mind, last week when we discussed this item, we talked about a number of optional items on which there has been no decision yet, including sort of a heated waiting area and a washroom. But this was the estimated amount for putting the through road in from Center to Dawson to allow that to be the transfer point for the buses.
So why is there a discrepancy, Mr. Jones? Are you? There's a 358, 359 up on page 173.
There is, and I apologize. I'm not sure why that is.
I just wonder, does that? I'm worried about the other 180,000 going on to our tax levy.
I would defer to the treasurer. However, my understanding is that the summaries that are included in the summary tables are the total amounts that are included in the budget. If this detail sheet is incorrect, that isn't the piece that would have been included in the budget. However, I will defer to the treasurer to answer that.
Your worship, if I may.
Yes, go ahead, Madam.
So currently, given that I'm sharing my screen, I cannot get into the budget software and so on and so forth. So if council would leave this item with me for tonight, and tomorrow we do have a presentation, I can take a few moments to clarify this. It's just that I do not have the ability to switch to a different software right now.
Can you go back to the summary sheet, Madam Treasurer?
Definitely. So
we have a total investment here of $1,625,000, of which 27% comes of tax levy and the rest is a grant.
That's correct, Your Worship.
Yeah. And so that total of 1.6 would pay for the 2 new buses, it would pay for the transit road, and probably for the upgrade to the point of sale machinery on board. Is that right, Mr. Blackie or Mr. Jones?
That's correct, Your Worship.
So, am I also correct? I think the total amount of the combined grants was about 2 million. So there still is 375,000 roughly that could be put towards a heated waiting room and washroom.
I would defer to Mr. Lackey on the total amount of the grant, Your Worship.
Mr. Lackey?
Yes, Your Worship, the total grant is approximately $2 million. That is correct.
So you still have 375,000 that you could spend on something. Is there anything else other than this heated waiting area and washroom that you've got on your plate?
There was projected in 2025, a portion of those funds was allocated for a specialized transit vehicle.
Okay.
So
okay,
that is where
maybe for mobility challenged folks.
That's correct.
Okay. All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's almost 10 o'clock. I think we've made our way through our capital budget, and I think we've left everything in it, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct, Madam Clerk?
Mm-hmm.
So, Madam Treasurer, do you wish us to pass the capital budget tonight, or do you want to wait till tomorrow to talk about it? Or councillors, what is your wish?
I would prefer to wait.
Your worship, I'd prefer to wait as well. I'd like to see the provisions that had to be added. And I'd like to see what that impact is, if I could.
Deputy Mayor, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I was going to make a motion, we pass the capital budget as is.
Okay. I don't.
But I can wait.
Yeah, okay. I think it seems like the will of council is to let it go till tomorrow and let's see how the operational budget goes. So, with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, I don't think we have anything further to discuss tonight. Is there any question period? Anybody on the phone, Mr. Bonato? Or? No, sir. Madam Clerk?
No.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor.
Yes, Mr. Councilor Peters.
Yeah, very briefly, if we circle back to the conversation we had about the additional money towards tree planting, is that a capital item or an operating item? Just so I know from staff where that would fall if we were to discuss that. In which division, obviously.
Through you, your worship, to Councillor Peters, staff have included a service level change item in the operating budget within infrastructure services for tree replacement. That is strictly for the boulevard trees. Mr. Osmond, of course, handles the trees that fall in parks. But we have been falling behind in recent years with respect to tree planting for a couple of reasons. One is because of the amount of money that's been allocated, but secondly, the cost of trees has gone up as well. So we do have a service level change in there to increase our budget for replacement trees. So that's certainly an area where it could be identified, and that is in the operating budget. Okay. But that would be for boulevard trees.
Understood.
And Mr. Osmond did talk about any facility changes or improvements that he's got trees on his radar and is including them in improvements to landscaping and new facility builds such as the fire hall. So
yeah, I agree. I just if we only add them when we're renewing facilities, it could take us a while, but I can leave it for an operating budget comment. It probably borders both brackets, and so it's not too important.
Okay, so councillors, I'm going to suggest that we wind things up tonight. Does anybody want to have a further comment, or can we call for a motion on the bylaw? I guess we're not going to vote on that tonight, are we?
Yeah, you can vote on the proceedings of council.
Oh, okay. All right, so 16.1, a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the council, the corporation town board of its council meeting, capital budget held on February 1st. May I have a motion for that, please? Councillor Taylor, second by Councillor Post. All in favor?
Yes.
And a motion to adjourn, please. Councillor Andrews, second by Deputy Mayor McIntosh. All in favor?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, folks, we'll see you tomorrow night. Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Night, everyone.